It's deep midnight out, the whole city's asleep, but everything's lit up by that huge red moon. The guy's lying in the middle of the street, eyes wide open, drooling and barely able to make any noise, pain locking up his whole body. A pretty girl lies nearby, her light hair scattered across the pavement, and her body's all red and swollen. A stranger with a face wound leans over her, grinning nastily as he touches her clothes. Bad move for the guy, because a tall dude with a stick is sneaking up behind him through a narrow alley. Hero called out the scum to keep him from harming the girl, and to distract him long enough to get some attention away from her. The guy with the face wound turned around at the sound of the stranger's voice, but he realized it was too late and his face showed pure fear. It was really him, the guy couldn't be wrong. He knew exactly who he'd faced, and that made him feel really good about himself. Hero swung his stick, realizing he was facing the rapist known as Electroshock Stick. The criminal's eyes locked on inevitable justice. His executioner was right there, nowhere to run, everything for him was over. Zhao Yu pulls a cigarette from a pack, but in his past life he died by accident. Later he ends up in this body, once a top-ranked criminal, but now part of a detective team investigating serious crimes in City Q. Today the department head made everyone work overtime until they catch the electroshocker criminal, which really bugged the detective who's been wanting a break for ages. Zhao Yu thinks about his future and whether he should go back to his old, familiar crimes from before. The guy takes his first drag and chokes, his lungs fill with foreign stuff, his new body's way too bad at smoking. The guy's totally freaked out, not getting what's going on or why the space around him just changed. It's like lightning in the clear sky. A brand new program pops up in front of his eyes, one he's never seen before and no one else can see, which only makes things weirder. The system's already running. Zhao Yu had only heard about this kind of mechanism before, never actually dealt with it. But now he's seeing it in action, so is this the same mythical program everyone's been talking about? He's thinking back to how his life used to be all about friends' parties, but that past is gone for good, nothing ever repeats itself. The guy's cigarette's slowly dying out, he still can't picture how this program could actually help him out. The detective was sitting on a bar stool smoking, thinking through his situation and realizing he didn't know a single person in this cursed place, and he couldn't believe his life was gonna end up like this. KOU noticed something nearby that pulled him out of his heavy thoughts about the past and future. Long legs wrapped in black stockings caught his eye. A chest that promised to keep the guy dreaming about her for nights to come. Sitting on the neighboring stool behind the bar was a stunning girl sipping red wine and throwing bold glances his way. This lady was basically a magazine cover come to life, and the detective was dying to get even a little of her attention. The blonde turned to the guy who called her and gave him that long, expectant look. The guy went all out with his charm to meet up with the beautiful blonde. Unfortunately for Zhao Yu, the girl wanted 3,000 a night, and he could barely scrape together one, which was basically a robbery. The guy wasn't giving up yet. Maybe the girl would bend her rules and give the charming stranger a small discount. Another guy interrupted the hero, took the pretty lady to his fancy hotel suite, and the detective could only watch as their backs disappeared down the street. Out of nowhere, the guy's gaze caught the attention of a strange guy who'd been hanging out in the bar all along, watching the whole thing from the other side of the room. The guy noticed the detective was watching him too, and his scraped-up face flashed with surprise and fear. The hero didn't like the guy's look, and made it clear both verbally and with hand signals. The young guy pulled his hoodie over his face to hide his wounds and slipped out, but Zhao Yao knew something was off. This guy was familiar, like from his past life. Detective brushes against something unknown with the tip of his boot, then bumps into the guy from the luxury room he'd already seen at the bar. Zhao Yu's eyes go wide with fear, even though he knew where it was leading, but the kid didn't expect what he saw. The guy's body lies sprawled in the middle of the dirty alley on the asphalt in an unnatural, stretched-out position. Detective keeps moving forward, realizing he's got the right trail and is heading in the right direction. That was definitely him. The criminal. Zhao Yu had seen him and took off running as fast as he could, grabbing a wooden stick along the way. The guy crept up silently, too obsessed with his victim to notice anyone else around him. He was happy because his conclusion was right, and the kid recognized the same guy from the bar with a slashed face. The creep turned around, knowing his carelessness could backfire, but the detective found him and approached without a sound. KOU knocked the guy out with one stick strike, and the electric baton lay at his feet in the narrow, dirty alley. A crowd gathered near the police station. The DNA results confirmed the man was the criminal, and finally he was caught, but no one expected Officer KO to be the one to arrest him. The hero walked away, didn't care about his coworkers' chats, only wanted the reward for capturing the rapist, which turned out to be a huge bonus. The guy was super happy with himself and the cash. Killer's start to his first day as a detective. The system showed up out of nowhere. The guy had forgotten about it, but it reminded him with a message that the meeting was over with 75% completion, and he got a one-time invisible bug. After using the bug, he could secretly listen in and it was undetectable by any device, basically a must-have for police work. People at the police station kept asking Zhao Yu where he knew the criminal would be, but he had no answer. The guy was scared to admit it himself. Didn't he get the system to set up this meeting for him? The hero was thinking about what it all meant, figuring out that 75% completion probably had something to do with the mission. The kid was wondering if following that kidnapper wasn't the reason his progress was so high, considering what happened that night. Once he was by the detective's bedside, he realized no matter how many setups the system threw at him, it all came down to whether he could lock the criminal up. Kou wanted to relax in his own bed after a tough day, but he didn't know if he'd even get another chance to solve a crime, though his thoughts weren't bothering him. The guy knew little and trusted fate, but he was sure when the time came for rewards, he'd chill out with some cute and nice ladies around. Tired from a long day, the guy finally crashed into a sweet sleep with hopes for the future. At 5 in the morning, the city had few places open, but the KFC's bright lights, hot food, and 24-hour promise lured in customers. The exhausted detective was eating his burger at the booth, but his much-needed break got interrupted by the loud snoring from his roomie. Other early morning guests at the place could feel the negativity and frustration rolling off the guy like waves, like he really wanted to start his new day. At the hostel where Zhao Yu stayed, the place was getting louder and smellier every day, and the kid was starting to like it less and less. The hero lit a cigarette, thinking through all his options, and immediately started looking for new rental housing where he wouldn't have those terrible neighbors. The young guys got burned by the harsh smoke, their throats were choking on the unbearable cough, and their bodies just weren't cut out for smoking. Something happened that the young guy couldn't predict, since he wasn't used to this new existence yet, and the system kicked off a new adventure. The 57th hexagram of the dragon's breath said to go with the flow, live in peace and calm, rotate around nature and be successful. So was this system really based on the theory of the 8 trigrams? The detective was smiling, loving this plan, nothing bad about going with the flow, and a girl was walking toward the woman was shaking, covered in blood and begging for help, clearly in a bad shape. Kou finally spotted the brunette, his eyes widened and blood drained from his face. The sight really shook him up. The woman in red collapsed right in front of the detective and stunned crowd, hitting the road hard. In the morning of April 22nd, the woman fainted in front of a KFC on J Street, where an officer from Kou's unit found her, but he couldn't just leave her in trouble. He stopped the bleeding, called an ambulance and police. The victim's in the hospital with nothing serious, but the cops think it's linked to another unsolved case that's been open for a year. The detective watched the event reconstruction on TV, but thought it wasn't good enough because the reporters failed to capture the full heroism of his actions. The guy returned with a smug grin to his conversation partner and asked what she thought about the report. A girl lay on a hospital bed with her arm cut off, which he'd found the day before at a KFC. The brunette didn't like that the police still couldn't find the killer and kept asking stupid questions, so she threw a pillow at the cop. Nothing could ruin Zhao Yu's mood. He was laughing like it was the last time, and even noticed the girl had a lot of strength in her other hand. This was the last straw for the woman. She tossed her shoe at the guy and finally pushed him out the door where his assistant was already waiting. The young police officer begged her boss not to be so rough, since the woman had already lost her right hand. The hero took the papers from the assistant, thinking there was always a silver lining since the woman at least had her left hand left. The guy was looking through the file on the third victim of the criminal, Loyan, who was lying in the hospital room right now. The criminal hid in the girl's car while she drove home without suspecting anything. A psycho lunges at his victim from the back seat, knocks her out, then pulls over on J Street and cuts off her hand. The victim wakes up the next morning, gets out of the car, and heads toward the nearest building in search of help. Li Wenyi, the guy's assistant, knows this is a serial kidnapper case, one who's already struck twice, and their last team failed to find any clues. This time the detectives have to solve it before the second squad, because the commander promised Zhou Yu a payout for the TV he recently smashed. The guy thinks he's got nothing to fear because nothing's impossible for him. The guy thought he was unstoppable, but the same system showed up again, the one that helped him catch the perp last time. Thanks to the program, the detective not only nabbed the electroshock attacker, but also helped get a new apartment. Right now, there's no better detective than Zhou Yu in the whole universe thanks to this system. The guy went back to the rookie cop, curious about what they knew about the previous 2 victims. The perp caught the second victim in an underground passage and left her with her right hand, pretty straightforward stuff. She ended up waking up at home without her hand, which was totally weird and made her freak out. The detective got super curious because the new info didn't fit the usual crime pattern. The blonde noticed the same odd detail, meaning the killer probably had a key. Zhao Yu looked at the case files again, his face showing confusion and a little doubt. The assistant didn't notice the guy hesitating at first, and kept talking about how the criminal somehow bypassed the cameras with no DNA or fingerprints left behind. Finally, the girl noticed she was alone and turned around to see her older brother was acting weird and had fallen way behind. The guy realized this time he might actually fail and needed money to pay for the broken TV he'd owe. Between chatting about work, the couple left the hospital, and the girl spotted something interesting that distracted her from the thief's problems. Street vendors offered a group photo with a real camel, and the younger officer really wanted to do it with her colleague. She looked around and heard someone calling for help and asking to stop the thief, but even that couldn't pull the guy away from his papers. A guy ran by the pair at lightning speed, really rattling Li Weini. The lady was super worried, thinking they were cops and should help catch the thief. Zhao Yu had the opposite take on the situation, not getting why the crime department guys were chasing some petty thief. The guy remembered his assistant wanted a photo with the camel and offered to do it while the traders were still around. A girl with long dark hair ran after the thief, begging for help to stop him. She didn't know what else to do because the thief had already snatched her bag and was running away fast. Chu Yao knew her, remembering her face from their past lives and never forgetting it. The guy's face froze with fear, wondering if he was really the only one who got reborn into this crazy world. The detective tossed his papers at his clueless assistant and bolted into the chaos. The senior officer proudly hopped onto the desert ship, while his younger colleague was confused about what was going on, thinking his behavior was really weird. The hero was heading toward where the man and woman just ran off, ready to help the lady and stop the criminal. The camel was zooming at insane speeds, chomping through asphalt with every step. Veggies were flying off the market stalls, wrecking both the sellers' cash and their morale. Chu Yu was closing in on the little thief with unstoppable force, leaving no chance for escape. The sellers were cleaning up the mess left by the chase, totally fed up with the chaos, and the damage was insane. The hero was closing in on the guy, who could already feel the animal's breath on the back of his neck, and just a little more and this wild one would catch up. The thief was getting squeezed by the situation, hoping to just grab the girl's purse and bolt, but now his chances were dropping like crazy, so he pulled out the hidden weapon from his pocket. KOU caught up with the guy, not even breaking a sweat, while the thief was totally wiped out and running like hell. The detective was almost surprised to see the glint of metal in the guy's hands, not sure what the hell he was hoping for. The criminal couldn't figure out what this weirdo on the web wanted from him, or why he was chasing him around. The cop's partner interrupted him with his detective badge, and the guy was really working in the serious crimes unit. The hero was bored out of his mind listening to the security guard's argument, and he definitely didn't deserve all that gratitude for his heroic act. A brunette pulled him out of his thoughts. She was grateful for the returned stuff, and the girl was a nurse at the hospital, so if the guy needed anything, she'd be happy to help. Even though Yao Jia looked like an old friend from his past and had the same name, it wasn't her, because his old friend was too gross to be a nurse. The detective handed the pretty girl his phone, wanting to stay in touch with this person, whoever they were, as long as they weren't against it. He didn't care who she was in this life, he just didn't want to lose her again. The system scared him again. The fight ended with a clash. Chu Yu sat on the rooftop near the building. His mission was 72% complete, and he got an invisible listening device. The hero wondered if all the meetings the system set up were really random, but he got so lost in thought he didn't notice his assistant approaching. The detective sipped a cooling drink, and when he thought about the investigation, the system set up a meeting with Yao Jia, and he needed to figure out how these meetings worked before using her. The guy clutches an empty can in his hand, but he's not ready to keep getting dragged into stuff he doesn't need. While Zhou Yu can only rely on his own strength right now, he needs to find more clues about the case. The guy jumps up suddenly, scaring the blonde a bit, and they're about to head out. In the serious crimes department, the pair meets the team leader Ku Pin, who's super upset because the guy isn't working, unlike the whole squad who had to do his job. All the cops are working overtime to catch the criminal, except one officer who's always goofing off and doing his own thing. The detective got distracted from his boring conversation by something way more interesting. Behind his colleagues was a huge board with all the details on the current case of the hand snatcher. Chu Yu got really into the info the cops had gathered over the whole investigation, which had a lot of stuff he didn't even know about. The team leader looked at the young guy and remembered how recently she was told the people in her new team were super talented. While the guy checked out the board, the brunette wondered why she'd never heard of this reckless guy before, who wasn't even in the investigation but now wanted to take her case and claim all the credit. The senior officer knew the guy had bet against Captain Liu, who was catching the criminal alone and way ahead of the rest of the police. Now the detective realized he wasn't invincible and came asking for help from Team B, or maybe specifically his leader. The main character was annoyed by this confident woman who thought she knew everything better than everyone else. The argument got out of hand. No cop wanted to back down from their stance. It was like a clash between two unyielding rocks. Chu Yu was getting more flustered from the confident brunette. Ku Pin knew exactly which strings to pull to mess with the guy. He slams his hand on the table, pinning the brunette between his body and the wall, and she's shocked by his sudden move. The guy is smug, telling her he came here for something totally unrelated to the case, but he doesn't bother explaining why. The detective tells the girl to chill, saying he's not gonna push her out of the case or reveal her before the Group V, since the piggy captains hate any disrespect and no one dares to insult their mate. Chu Yua is smirking because the department's wasting time on a dead end, and he's confident he'll handle it way better. The attacker dodges all the cameras. Either he knows the area well or lives in the same neighborhood as the victim, the officers figure. Bad news for the cops. Thieves had a hidden bug listening in on every conversation. Only Officer Joe could see and hear the device, thanks to the tech his system gave him, and he was stoked about it. The guy was still standing in the middle of the station, staring at the board, but his mind was already way out there, where the kidnapper used to operate. Tests showed Luo Min used inhaled drugs, 2 types of anesthetics, and an IV injection. One of the anesthetics was commonly used on animals, a tranquilizer. Then he used a sharp, axe-like weapon to slash the woman's arms with one powerful swing. The criminal dragged the first victim through the tunnels, so you could tell he was a big, strong guy. The forensic expert said the villain didn't try to break the tough shoulder bone, so maybe it was a woman, and they also found some substance on Luo Min's car. All the fingerprints at the crime scenes were wiped, but that still didn't explain why the criminal went to such lengths to hide his figure. The car passed through tons of traffic cameras, but none of them caught a glimpse of the criminal. Wait, maybe what the suspect was hiding under the hoodie were long, light hair. The detective's sudden realization could explain everything. Probably the villain was a woman. But why the blonde did it made no sense, since all 3 victims had nothing in common. Maybe the criminal was acting on a whim or had some mental illness. Nothing actually explained why the villain took only the hands. There had to be some logical reason. The detective hit on a genius idea, finally figuring out that revenge was the real motive. He forgot he was still in the precinct with all those cops around him who didn't get how he came to that conclusion. Chu Yuo had the best explanations for all his judgments and an incredibly strong gut feeling. The criminal sat before the board, ready to cross off another name as her list kept getting short. The girl's weird collection slowly kept growing. Now she had 3 arms. Time kept moving on. The clock had already passed midnight. The city was long quiet and its people were asleep in their homes. Detective Joe was the only one still on duty, thinking that if the culprit was taking hands, she'd be keeping them somewhere in the city only she knew, and every time she saw them get angry, it gave her a little comfort. He lit a cigarette, but no explanation made sense for why the victims had their right hands taken. What made the criminal special about this particular hand? It was weird. This time his body didn't react to the cigarette at all. Pretty cool surprise. The guy had something that could help him in this case. Maybe now the system would come through. Time to pull out the secret weapon. Chen Zhouyu launched the plan. The action started right now. The girl was hiding behind the flower bed and didn't know how much longer she'd have to wait. The guy was staring at an interesting scene but didn't get what was going on. The lady called the detective on the phone while she was near the police station. The girl spotted a cute white kitten, which explained her weird pose that the detective caught her in. The young brunette smiled at the guy, happy to see him. Zhao Yu asked the girl what she was doing so early by the branch, but she thought they were allies, so she came to him. The two met when the young lady tried to steal money. She begged the detective not to tell her dad, who wouldn't be happy about her actions. The main character agreed, but only if they split the stolen money evenly between them. The little lady had no idea the guy was blackmailing her to move into her dad's house, but he denied it since they were now allies. That's exactly how the trigram brought them together, though the guy never would have thought that. Zhou Yu floated downstream, and that's exactly how he ended up in his new place. The hero was wiped out, hadn't slept all night, and wasn't in the mood for riddles, so he demanded straight answers about what the girl wanted from him. The kid couldn't believe what the young guy asked for. He wanted the detective to go to his parent-teacher conference. The guy couldn't believe anyone with a clear head would suggest something like that. She was probably just messing around. But the girl had already deleted the father's message and sent it to her accomplice. Guy was pretty unsure about the proposal since he didn't want to stay in his new place. But the young lady had a plan. If her dad kicked the brunet out of the apartment, he could always stay with her and he'd make a great dad. She saw his gaze soften, knowing her magic was working on him. Kou agreed, but only if his landlord's daughter never called him dad again. The detective was bored out of his mind, sitting at the parent-teacher meeting at music school too. The girl figured they were in this together, and if dad found out about her skipped classes and personal info leaks, both of them would be in trouble. The guy still didn't get how he got dragged into this mess, how that girl made him act like a jerk. The guy was sitting in the auditorium with other parents, dying to get the concert over with. Chao Yu watched the pianist's hands closely. They were next level beautiful. The guy couldn't wrap his head around what kind of twisted logic made someone want to take away such gorgeous body parts. This school used to be a city music hall where a big music competition happened, and it raised a bunch of musical geniuses. The officer remembered the second victim was a music professor at the college, and she had solid piano skills. It was also weird that the first victim lost her arm during a concert ride, which the guy thought about calling his assistant. Li Weini was at the police station and she was always ready to help with the case. The assistant being confused by her was a big deal because she didn't think checking if the victims played piano was necessary. Kid figured if the two injured girls were playing musical instruments, the third was probably into music too. Guy's phone blasted a loud ringtone, messing up the other parents trying to listen to the concert. Chow Yu answered the call, knowing new clues had surfaced on the important kidnapping case. Kid yelled out loud as he left the hall, ruining the music for everyone, and no one could believe how rude he was. Young cop told the guy the first victim, Gao Tian, was heading to a piano concert, and that was basically a jackpot. Word got out that the guy's kid was acting out and failing school, but people saw him hanging out with Jiang Ziosin, who made the top 3 in her class. Everyone in the room was stunned by the girl's achievements, but the detective was only interested in the second victim, Luo Min. All 3 victims took piano lessons in 10th grade but took exams in different years, so the hero figured he needed to dig into their school history. The officer thought if the attacks were revenge, the attacker had to know all the victims played piano, which meant she probably knew how to play too. The only thing that didn't fit was that the victims were questioned about knowing the other victims, but they didn't know each other. If the victims didn't know each other, they might have met the criminals somehow, but it's unclear how. The detective remembered that during the concert, the pianist mentioned how 20 years ago she participated in a music contest at this school. Zhao Yao's sudden realization hit like a bolt of lightning. They could have known each other through the contest. The criminal was an amazing pianist, but she lost to the victims and turned her hatred toward them. At the same time, she decided to get revenge on all her tormentors. While the detective was on the phone, the school principal tried to speak up, but the officer's loud voice kept cutting him off. The principal's speech was ruined because someone interrupted him mid-rant. The guy was psyched about the news his assistant gave him, only to find out all 3 victims were students from the school's piano competition and made it to the finals. But that wasn't all. The shocker was the competition was actually held at the same school he was currently at. The principal finally snapped and stormed down the hallway to confront the jerk. The school principal's unexpected appearance actually helped the officer out because he needed a list of participants from a 10-year-old piano competition. The detective was pretty sure he'd catch the culprit soon, since she had to be on that same list. Staff at middle school number 2 were digging through archives looking for the right materials. Workers tried to tell the guy he couldn't find a 20-year-old video since it might have been destroyed already, but he wasn't in a rush. Chow Yu was reading a book waiting for the video to turn up, and he had plenty of time to spare. Workers thought it was like prison and didn't realize how much more old material they'd have to go through to find what they needed. Out of nowhere, the guy got a call from his assistant saying she'd found the list of competition participants. The detective smirked, already feeling like he was about to cuff the criminal's wrists. The younger cop and the guy showed up at Zhao Shan's house, the 10th place finisher in the competition. The woman explained the judges were music university professors. The top 3 were picked by famous schools and the rest were regular colleges. The first 5 spots were elite, only the best could make it, while everyone below 6th like Zhao Shan was treated like regular test takers. Maybe because of this competition, the criminal had to live a life she didn't want at all. The blonde gripped the list of participants, thinking Zhao Shan, who came in last, was the killer. The woman's belly was too big to go back to the crime scene and pull off the hands. The detective listened carefully to his assistant. Since the villain wasn't on the finalists list, the cops had to check out every contestant. He grinned, figured it was a solid plan, and decided to hand the heavy task off to his younger colleague. The assistant thought her boss was just messing with her, but he was already eager to grab the culprit. Li Weini noticed the guy had changed a lot lately, acting way different than before. The boy remembered he used to be a gangster in his past life, and still wasn't used to being a cop. But the assistant was talking about the dark circles under his eyes from stress, not some other kind of bags. The girl was stressing out the senior officer and figured he needed more rest. Maybe taking a break would help the guy figure out what to do next, since it looked like they were heading in the right direction. The system reminded her again that the collision was 88% complete. The detective got a universal key that can open any lock and a 6-digit password. The main character wondered if parent-teacher meetings and clues were connected, and needed to head home to try activating the system. The cops said their goodbyes. Both needed a break, so they agreed to meet up the next day at the station. Chu Yu was sure if the criminal would act like last year, there'd be 3 days between victims, so she had to show up already tomorrow. The detective grinned like he could smell blood. He was gonna catch that girl for sure. At 5 in the morning, some unexpected loud noises woke the guy up outside his apartment. Jiang Ziosin was pounding on the door. She knew the apartment owner was inside because she'd heard a loud cough at night. The guy figured the girl came so early because of a messed-up parent-teacher meeting. The guy told the school principal he's a cop investigating the stolen hands case, which might be linked to the piano competition that used to happen at the school. Things were bad because the young lady was really upset, which could lead to serious trouble for the guy. The hero got up from bed, but opening the door wasn't part of his plan at all. Chu Yu thought sneaking around under the bed might be a good idea, maybe the girl wouldn't find him there. Jiang Ziosen wasn't going to back down if the guy didn't open the door, she planned to do it herself. The girl walks into a room that looks totally empty, not even lived in, abandoned. She checks every nook and cranny, not missing a single inch of the room. Finally, the young miss peeks under the bed and realizes the guy's not even here. The kid can't figure out where the room's owner actually went. Jiang Ziosen checks the balcony too, but the brunette just vanished into the ground. The girl slammed the door in anger, determined to make sure her backstabbing partner would pay for breaking their deal. Zhou Yu waited on the balcony of the neighboring apartment the whole time, watching the girl leave his territory. The guy almost forgot she was his housekeeper with keys to every apartment, but caught himself just in time. The detective didn't expect the young brunette to lock the balcony door, not sure why she needed to. The hero thought about how to get into the apartment and decided to try the neighbors, maybe it'll work. The cop remembered the homeowner told him there were 4 beautiful ladies living next door. The guy jumped onto his neighbor's balcony who worked the night shift, and he was already used to moving that way. It was the 5th morning, so there shouldn't be anyone in the apartment. Chen Yu calmly looked around and headed toward the exit of the room. The blonde was coming out of the bathroom, thinking she was alone in the house. The guy's face shows he's totally shocked, didn't expect to get caught red-handed. The girl starts shouting, but the hero slaps her mouth shut so no one rushes over. The detective realizes this time he might really be in trouble since he can't prove his innocence. The guy's lucky, the girl recognizes him as the cop who saved her recently. The guy knows this lady from before since he rescued her from a perp once. This was the blonde he met in the bar, and who later became the target of the maniac shock rod. Chu Yu explained he lives next door and accidentally got locked on the balcony, so he figured no one was home and went through the girl's apartment. The lady lit up, and this meeting became a surprise for both of them. The blonde really did work that late usually, but recent events left a deep mark on her heart. That's why the beauty decided to take a break and rest, she told the guy, exhaling harsh smoke from her cigarette. The girl gave a mysterious smile, but something kept spinning in her head the whole time. The blonde got up close to the guy and asked how he knew exactly who would be attacked that night. The officer said there wasn't a single pretty girl in the bar that night, and it looked like the attacker thought the same. The beauty surprised the detective by shoving him onto the bed. She didn't expect Officer Zhao to be so romantic and say such sweet compliments. The blonde girl sat down next to the guy and said her neighbor would be back later in the day. The lady's cheeks were flushed, but she knew this chance came around once in a lifetime. Their conversation got cut short by a loud phone ring. The phone screen showed her owner, but that didn't surprise the detective. She was playing piano. The pretty girl didn't get why the guy suddenly got cold and his mood changed, but the guy needed to find out more about the photo. The girl decided to say the photo was taken way back when she was still in school. The detective leaned in closer to the blonde, curious if she could play the piano. The lady took the hero's phone and explained her mom made her learn to play as soon as she started talking. The biggest shock for the cop was that the blonde even competed in a contest at middle school number 2. Kou cornered the girl by the bed, desperate to find out which exact contest she participated. The beauty answered the detective's questions without a clue. It was tournament number 10. The guy smiled, and that's when the criminal was also participating. The guy kept asking questions, needing to know if the girl knew the names of the top finalists like Gao Tian, Yuan Lily, or Luo Meina. The girl didn't know the finalists. She wasn't that good of a pianist since she didn't even make it to the top 20. The beauty didn't get why the officer was asking her those questions. She hoped to do something way more fun than interrogations. Zhao Yu he just smiled and asked his companion if she'd ever heard of the kidnapper's hand. The blonde knew exactly what the guy was talking about. Everyone was talking about it, and it really scared her. The detective wasn't done yet, so he told them all the victims had been in the same competition as the girl. Fear froze on the lady's face. She didn't want to be on the maniacs list, but now all the victims were finalists, so she didn't have to worry. The dark-haired guy gave the pretty girl a strong hug, trying to calm her down, hoping for details that would help arrest the criminal faster. If the girl got the details right, some weird stuff actually happened at the competition. After talking to the neighbor, the cop drove off to share the news with his younger colleague. The guy found out that this year's competition had a musical prodigy named Li Dan, who was just 12 but suddenly quit right before the final round. Her partner was worried someone might have bribed Li to throw the competition and not win first place. Kou said he heard the prodigy's family was really poor, had to sell their own house to afford piano lessons for their daughter. The guy didn't believe the girl could just show up like that, since it was her only shot and she'd never agree to anything for money. The guy knew these were elite competitions, and if he made it into the top 3 his life would change forever, so something went wrong during them. The assistant had no idea what to do, since after the competitions the Li Dan family vanished like they'd been swallowed by the earth. The detective smiled, knowing the best professional at finding missing people was exactly who they were heading to now. The blonde realized it was about Zhang Jinfeng, but feared his help might come with a price too steep to pay. Li Wei's words really shocked Zhao Yu, since the specialist had been working for the police. The assistant explained that the guy they were heading to always only looked out for himself, and the department didn't like him much because of that, even calling him the cunning vine. The new info really caught Officer Zhao's attention, so he floored the gas pedal to max speed, trying to get there faster. The detective's arrival didn't go unnoticed, since everyone in the room knew who was coming. The missing persons expert smiled, not getting why the police were showing up. The brunette smiled, feeling right at home among these people. The assistant interrupted the guy's conversation, stepping in because of those stupid questions, since everyone knew why they were there. A few hours before the meeting, the detective called Zhang Jingfen and told him he was looking for one person, but he said he couldn't talk on the phone and invited the brunette over instead. The officer was now carefully studying his conversation partner, waiting for some good news for himself. The blonde guy was just having fun, not getting why they were in such a rush. The billiard game was only just starting. The rookie cop couldn't take the tension anymore and decided to leak info, fed up with the situation and the people around them. Zhang Jinfeng invited the hero to join a new billiards game, but he wasn't in the mood to talk about anything right now. Zhao Yu asked the guy how much he wanted to bet and how many moves he could make. The clever snake let the detective hit as many times as he wanted. The guy smiled, he got exactly the response he was hoping for. The whole room echoed with a crash as the wooden cue snapped against the pool table's corner. The officer held a jagged piece of wood in his hand, and it was his first strike. The guy used the second hit to break the blonde's kneecap, then followed up with the third and fourth blows. A huge thug grabbed Zhao Yue by his shirt, not liking the kid's attitude. The detective knocked down the giant with one hit, and the guy's foul breath really stank to him. One swift kick from the hero, and the thug was already crumpled on the other side of the room. Bugu didn't like the guy using forbidden moves and told the rest of the gang to grab him. 3 serious-looking guys with sticks were approaching the cops. The brunette told his assistant to hide behind him and stay out of it, confident he could handle it alone. The guy's eyes lit up with devilish fire, because he hadn't had a good workout with real opponents in a while. The guy didn't even break a sweat after taking out the gangsters, and now he's heading toward their leader. Zhang Jinfeng decided not to take a chance, and still went to talk to the detective about the case. Zhao Yu is happy with the situation, and even promised his new friend he'd pay for dinner someday. The clever villain refused the hero's offer, because he's always been ready to help the police. Following the missing persons expert's lead, the police ended up at the Li Dan family's house. Zhang Jinfeng quickly found the family because even if they changed their names, the medical records had everything and there were no sick people left. Li Dan's dad had to go to the hospital several times 15 years ago for a heart attack, and her mom was hospitalized last year for a tumor, so the family couldn't leave the city. The detective knew the area where the girl lived because a third victim's incident happened about 100 meters away from that street. Maybe exactly because the criminal lived nearby, it was possible to bypass all the surveillance cameras. Zhao Yue couldn't wrap her head around how she could just casually carry home someone else's limbs. Cops knocked on the door of the apartment, addressed the cunning turtle got for them. The door was locked. Did the guy mess up and they were already waiting, or had the suspect left town? Just as the guy was about to barge in without a warrant, a woman's silhouette appeared by the door. An old lady opened the door, a coffee-drinking woman barely standing on her feet and confused why she was being bothered. The blonde started the conversation, showed her badge and asked if Li Dan lived in the building. The girl's mom invited the guys home and offered drinks, but it turned out she was the one they were looking for. The guy spun around halfway and asked the women if the woman was playing piano. The mom explained that having a musical instrument was taboo in their family, and they never mentioned it since her husband died. Dan Dan, as her mom called her, was always super talented and won a bunch of contests, including coming in 3rd place in the second-to-last round of middle school number 2 10 years ago. Li Dan thought the difference between her and the other contestants was small, so she decided to up the stakes in the final round by letting the pianists pick exactly what to play. The day before the final, sponsors pulled a last-minute surprise and organized a practice session for the competition participants. After everyone left, the girl stayed behind to practice and really went for it on the instrument, and the music totally took over her whole body. Something no one saw coming happened. The kid's eyes widened with fear and tears rolled down their cheeks. Horrible pain locked the girl's body. She doubled over, clutching her right hand. The piano keys were soaked in Li Dan's blood. The doctor told the parents the kid's middle finger was cut off with a sharp object. Part of it could still be reattached, but they needed to find it fast. For the girl whose whole life revolved around the piano, it was almost like a death sentence, so her dad went back to the middle school auditorium. The blood from the musical instrument had already been cleaned up, and part of Li Dan's finger was gone forever. The sponsors were scared this tragedy would mess with the other competitors, so they tried to hide everything until the competition ended, but by then the police couldn't find anything. It was only known that the finger was severed by a sharp blade placed between a black and white key. The piano spot he picked was rarely used, but the PC chose forced Dan Dan to press there really hard. After physiotherapy, when her hand healed, Lee Dan still shook every time she saw the piano. The woman, through tears, told how her husband had a heart attack soon after, got hospitalized, died, and her daughter was physically and emotionally scarred. The guy listened closely to the woman's story, and all the facts fit together into one clear picture. The only thing left was to find proof of the girl's guilt and grab her. He spotted a room with a heavy lock on the door. The woman suddenly freaked out, saying this room belonged to her daughter. Right now the girl's out doing a village tour with her troupe and won't be back for days. KOU mentioned the film strip used in the third victim's car was also used in the theater for different plays. The detective didn't hide from the woman that Lee Dan was tied to their case, and plenty of evidence could be in her room. The guy said someone was after the woman's daughter, shocking both the mom and his partner. He figured it might be the same guy who once stuck a blade between the keys to open the door with the key the system gave him. The older woman didn't want anyone in her daughter's room, terrified she'd get angry if she found out someone had been there. The officer promised to keep the girl safe and leave the room as if no one had ever been there. The door opened and the guy took the first step inside. A creepy skeleton popped out of the closet, scaring the crap out of the kid and making him freak out inside. The young cop assistant tackled the guy, trying to grab him before he could run. It was just regular medical gear, the kind you see in schools and clinics all the time. The detective calmed his assistant down, telling her it was just her imagination and nothing scary was actually there. The house owner walked in, flipped the switch, and didn't get why the blonde was so freaked out. He noticed a few more books on the shelves that caught his attention, all about anesthetics and amputations. The hero asked the woman if her daughter studied medicine, but she said no, even though she'd worked for a while at a veterinary clinic. The detective remembered the tests that showed Luo Minj had been given an inhalation, 2 types of anesthetics, and an intravenous injection, with one of the anesthetics being an animal tranquilizer. Koyuo was surprised there was no table in the room. The guy lifted the mattress off the bed, while his assistant told the woman they weren't looking for anything specific, just checking what was where. The guy put the bed back in place and told the women who found him everything he'd been looking for in the room. He flashed his most charming smile and asked the family head to wait in the hallway so they could take a few photos with the colleagues who found the clues. The woman was still worried about her daughter, but the detective assured her that they'd be watching her closely in the department. Li Weini sighed heavily, not getting why the older one kept lying to this nice young lady. What the assistant saw in bed scared her real good. The cops found all the evidence and stolen body parts hidden under Lee Dan's mattress. Detective finally found the culprit, but it didn't make him happy. The assistant was impressed by the guy's genius because he figured the clues were all in the room. The guy thought it was weird and suspicious for the criminal to scream through the door. Another person figured out Lee Dan's right hand was injured the same way as the other victims, and her mom had surgery in May right after 2 incidents involving limb removal. 9 months later, after her mom's condition stabilized, she committed her 3rd crime and all the missing evidence is now in the hands of the police. Under her bed was a pile of photos of the crime scenes and victims. She prepared all this to leave the woman with nothing. KOU now had a clear picture of these crimes in front of him. That day, on the 24th, Lee Dan was at the same concert as the first victim, Gao Tian, and after the concert, the criminal followed her. Then the criminal knocked out the victim and dragged her into the storage room. The pianist took her arm off and didn't leave the scene right away. She dissolved the final note in formaldehyde and hid it away. Lee Dan came back only 2 months later. She sat in the ventilation shaft all night or waited to grab the can. Then the girl snuck into the gym through the ventilation duct, blended in with the crowd, and slipped out of the building unnoticed. The criminal waited until nightfall on the 25th to get on the roof of the house. The blonde used a ladder to climb onto the roof of Yuan Lily's building. Lee Dan slides down the rope from the rooftop to the second victim's balcony to get inside the apartment. The villain made copies of the apartment keys and installed a listening device in the morning, so they knew for sure Yuan Lily would be home alone that day. When the girl fell asleep, the criminal sneaked into her bedroom and left her hands tied. After everything Lee Dan did over the course of 7 days, she ended up lying underground. The detective was sure the villain even prepared a toilet seat to leave no trace of herself behind. The assistant was really upset because Lee Dan's hatred for her victims was so intense, and now she was getting revenge on everyone she thought might be involved, even though one person had just taken her hand. The only thing that didn't fit in the picture was a photo of a water pistol, and the detective couldn't figure out why it might have been needed. Under the bed there was also a photo of a dug-up grave, but the police didn't know who it belonged to or who had dug it up yet. The assistant also noticed something that really got her excited, and she couldn't wait to share her find with her boss. Under the bed there was a photo of Xiao Jiajin's company, which did international trade and had recently moved to Australia. Guy didn't get why Lee Dan was gathering so much info on this guy, but then it hit him: 3rd place at the competition, and the girl named Xiao Lulu took it. KOU realized the entrepreneur was the next target. Girl was flying back to town at 3 p.m. today, as noted on her ticket. Detective checked his phone, but the clock said the plane with Xiao Jiajin was already supposed to land in the city over 4 hours ago. Hero ran out of the apartment, needed to find Li Dan fast, and told his assistant to snap photos of all the evidence on camera and hurry to the station for backup. The assistant confirmed that Xiao Jiajin was actually the girl who placed third in the contest. The blonde also found out that the girl got accepted into the National Folk Music Conservatory, where she started working in musical equipment and became a famous entrepreneur, then changed her name. The detective was already rushing to his car while listening to his colleague's report, needing to find the criminal fast. The assistant couldn't get why the senior was in such a hurry, since the girl once known as Xiao Lulu was now living in Australia. He figured out that the dug-up grave on the photo belonged to the entrepreneur's father, Li Dan, and they intentionally dug that hole. The criminal sent photos to Xiao Lulu claiming her father's grave collapsed for no reason to lure her into the city and leave her vulnerable. Li Wengxi didn't know where the older brother was planning to look for the woman. The car had already started moving, the new Australian's plane landed an hour ago, and the detective was rushing to find her. Xiao Jiajin stood on the cemetery at her father's dug-up grave. A punishment in the form of Li Dan, with an axe, was approaching the woman from behind. Wayne called to say they couldn't track the criminal's phone, so the detective told them to find Xiao Lulu. Zhao Yu zoomed through a red light at breakneck speed, but his assistant couldn't keep up finding the victim's location. The guy was so focused on the case he didn't even notice where he was driving. The hero realized if Xiao Lulu came only for business, she'd be at the graveyard. No cameras at the grave meant it was the perfect spot for one last hit. A car zipped past pedestrians on a red light. Grandma and her grandkid, who were crossing the street at the time, noticed the driver was really bad and the cops should catch him. Xiao Lulu lay unconscious on the cemetery by her father's grave. Li Dan stood over the girl with an axe in her hand. The detective got there just in time, shouting at the criminal to stop and drop the weapon. The girl didn't expect anyone to see her, and that's when the guy's appearance shocked her. The pianist ran through the cemetery, but the officer stayed right on her tail, no chance to catch a break. Every time the guy thought he was about to grab her, she'd just pull away again like she had some kind of sixth sense. Zhao Yue was sweating bullets, out of breath, and totally wiped out from the chase. Li Dan crashed into the wall. No matter how fast she ran, she still couldn't fly without those wings behind her. The detective pulled out his cuffs and gloated over the girl's predicament, while the guy found the whole thing hilarious. The criminal was mentally running through escape plans as the cop closed in on her. When Li Dan turned around, she was holding a gun she wasn't about to hesitate using. The guy didn't see that coming at all. Next thing he knew, a water gun shot him. Now the guy got why she kept that photo of kids' toys among her evidence. The detective's head spun, the world around him shook, sweat broke out on his forehead, and he barely managed to keep his body upright. The guy was pulled into Van Fei's arms. Zhao Yu collapsed, using his body to pin the doctor to the ground. The assistant was super worried about her colleague, but the guy finally came to. The guy looked shocked at the girl he'd landed on, and she was an incredible beauty. Lady Tomno looked at the young guy and held out her hand to him. Kou took the top end of the lady's scarf in his and helped her up. Wan Fei said as she got up that she'd heard a new detective hooligan had appeared in the ward, but didn't expect to see him on a field call today. The detective apologized to the doctor with a completely neutral expression for the incident. The guy finally remembered where he was and what he was doing there. His eyes widened in terror. The guy turned to the younger police officer and loudly asked where Xiao Lulu was and what happened to her arm. The hero heard the answer from a completely different angle, and it came from a male voice. Deputy Commander Alu Zhang, who wanted to know why the officer didn't present all the evidence right away, because if the killer escaped from town, it would cause problems for everyone. The blonde defended Zhao Yu, saying the evidence was recently obtained, but there were still doubts about its reliability. The doctor jumped in and said that if the detective hadn't arrived on time, the businesswoman would have lost her arm, and the young guy got a dart from the stadium. Out of nowhere, the guy busted out laughing. The detective reminded them and the commander that they'd bet on the guy catching the criminal on his own and definitely winning the monitor. To everyone's surprise, the hero went the opposite way from the exit at the cemetery. The guy knew exactly what he was doing, walked up to the grave and kicked it hard. A big hole opened under the guy and he fell right through. Everyone nearby ran to the cliff, scared out of their minds for the cop. Zhao Yu was sitting with the criminal underground and asked her to take a photo by heart. Li Dan had a pair of handcuffs put on her wrists. The pianist was being taken away from the cemetery, which thrilled Li Wayne even though the detective didn't share her excitement. The younger cop was super curious how the senior figured out where the criminal was. The guy couldn't explain how the invisible tracking device the system gave him stuck to his neck before he passed out, which was why the killer was caught. The detective figured out Li Dan had been hiding on the building rooftop for 7 days last time, so she didn't go too far this time either. But that still didn't explain how the guy knew exactly which grave the girl was hiding in. The guy knew exactly which grave to dig, and the assistant was proud she noticed the clue. Li Weini thought the hero never lost consciousness and saw everything with his own eyes. Zhao Yu went wild with laughter because he loved how the cop's deductive skills worked out. The system said the meeting was done, and the detective got 5 invisible lie detectors with 10-minute recordings. The completion level was super high. The invisible tracking device really helped this time, and the lie detector will definitely come in handy. The detective tapped his index finger against his lower leg, thinking hard. The system of lucky chances was activated today, and it said lightning and thunder only come together to split everything in two and make all 5 elements rate. The detective was sitting across from the killer wondering if the system was hinting at this meeting specifically. Li Dan didn't lift her head or look at the guy. The only thing she cared about was who exactly this was. Zhao Yu didn't quite get the pianist's question. He had no idea what she was asking about. The girl hit the table with her hand missing a finger. She was trying to figure out who did this to her. The imprisoned woman had a right to know who had put the blade in the piano. The cop realized the criminal didn't know the victim's name and cut off everyone's hands. Li Dan was furious because her life was ruined, and everyone who made it to the final was to blame. The criminal thought one of the 3 victims had already confessed to hurting her, because that was the only way to track her down. The detective looked at the girl, who was way too confident to think the police had no other way to find her besides the victim's confessions. The guy told the pianist he figured out all 3 victims were in the same contest as her and just found her house. Girl's anger hit a new high. It was impossible even if the guy found out about her. He'd never be able to track her down no matter what. Records of his mom's hospitalization helped Zhao Yu find the criminal, but still didn't explain how he found the grave where she'd hidden. Sweat dripped down the guy's forehead. He couldn't admit he'd touched the invisible tracker on the girl, so he just said the anesthesia wore off too early. Anger faded. Li Dan was left with disappointment. It was impossible. All her efforts had been in vain. Silence fell in the office. The young people didn't know what else to add. The guy answered all the questions. The girl went first, admitting her dad had put all his hopes on her. The killer broke down in tears, realizing she was powerless. Her dad was dead, and her mom had cancer, leaving nothing in her life. Kou watched the woman and listened to her story, but his face showed no emotion. The guy got up from the table. The interrogation was over. All the questions had been asked. The guy headed for the door, but stopped because there was one more thing he wanted to say. The guy didn't turn around and asked Li Dan if she thought about her mom before getting revenge. The criminal's tears poured like rain as she wondered how her mom could survive without her around, and who'd take care of her. Li Dan closed her eyes and the weight of her crimes finally hit her, crushing the wall of hatred that had been protecting her heart. Before leaving the door, the hero said that a person's heart can't lose balance and hatred can't cross borders. After talking to the prisoner, a wave of anger hit the detective. He knew the guy who broke Li Dan was still out there somewhere. The detective ran into his assistant, and a bunch of angry guys waiting for the guy in the middle of the office. One of the visitors spotted the guy approaching the group. The biggest guy walked up to the hero, fists clenched, and the group had been waiting for him the whole time. Zhao Yao's face showed no emotion as the leader ordered them to take him. He tossed his health to the other end of the room. The mean squad leader told the kid to stop. These were USL alley traders whose goods the guy with the camel had destroyed, and they came to get compensation. The officer had no idea what the hell was going on. The visitors looked more like little extortionists than unlucky sellers. Kou grabbed the main guy by the ear, holding a note with the compensation amount. He wanted to teach them a lesson. The detective wanted to know where that huge sum came from because he didn't do any physical damage, and since the group came to him, they should at least properly state their demands. A devilish spark lit up in the guy's eyes. He could judge the man for that slander. Someone called the hero by name, pulling everyone's attention away from the extortionists. The police station arrived at by Xiao Lulu. She wanted to give the detective 100,000 yuan as a thank you for saving him. The girl was super grateful, and besides the cash reward, wanted to have dinner with the guy. Lu Jian, who didn't want to take the detective's money, but the guy needed it, so he told the teenager he couldn't accept gifts. The guy refused the dinner, which went against the precinct's rules, so they shouldn't meet up. Zhao Yu asked the girl to write a donation to avoid future problems. The businesswoman looked at the hero who saved her and agreed to all the kids' terms. Under her colleagues and Lu Jian, whose jealous stares, the woman handed the teenager her business card. The girl said goodbye to the cops and told the guy to call her anytime if he needed help. While the detective was busy, the extortionists hoped to slip away unnoticed. The guy's escape turned into a disaster when the guy heard movement behind him. Kou grabbed the scum by the hair and handed him a stack of bills, telling him to give the money to the affected merchants. The group of guys promised they'd do exactly what the guy said and make sure all the sellers got their just desserts. The guys bolt out of the precinct, done their job, and don't want to stick around no more. The detective turns to his squad and promises a nice dinner after work. The cops are stoked about the free food, fun time with the new rich guy. Kou stares at the photo board from Li Dan's arrest and knows he can't let things hang. While checking the finalists for the 10th music contest, the guy gets a chill, finally figuring out who stuck the blade in the piano and who was the real monster in that scary story. Detective was sipping coffee at a table, staring at the same cursed contest results that had messed things up before. The guy knew only 4 people had a motive to get Li Dan out of the contest, but just one had the real reason to mess with her. Xiao Lulu was stunned by the officer's claim, thinking that if any of the 3 victims were guilty, the killer would have been caught by now and this wouldn't be his friend's problem. The entrepreneur was furious about what he'd heard, figuring his hero really thought she could hurt the girl, when she was just a victim trying to lose her hand. The guy studied Xiao Lulu carefully and asked if she'd ruin Li Dan's life. The girl's eyes went wide with fear and shock. She never expected to hear such a direct question in her whole life. When the guy named the criminal to the businessman, there was no doubt she knew who wanted to attack her, and she remembered what happened at the contest. The girl denied being involved in the past events, but the detective checked her records and found out her dad forged documents to let her compete. They were willing to do anything for the finals. The warrior also entered the 9th contest but couldn't make it to the finals. The 10th was her last hope. She was the only one of the 4 finalists with a motive. The former musician demanded proof because without it, Zhao Yu's words sounded like empty accusations, proving nothing at all. The entrepreneur knew that without the blade, the current prisoner's life would have been just like any other girl's, if not better. The guy explained that Li Dan is now the mother, her father's dead, and her mom has cancer with hatred wrapping around the girl's soul and it's not going to last long. The conversation partner was shaking, guilt eating at her. She couldn't take any more of this story about her former rival. Xiao Lulu's eyes welled up. No one could imagine how hard those years were with that terrible secret, and her actions left her with nothing. Kou hoped for recognition, but the girl had been living with the unavoidable shadow of her past, peeking around every corner for years. The guy hands the man a paper towel so he can wipe his tears. The girl admits she was really involved in the case, but it's only part of the truth. 18 years ago, the day before the contest, Xiao Lulu rehearsed until 3 p.m., then went to her room to avoid disturbing other contestants. That night, the young pianist's dad said he forgot something in the hotel lobby and had to rush back. The future entrepreneur wanted to leave with her husband, but he barked at her to stay home and not go anywhere. Dad rarely talked to the girl in a loud voice, so she couldn't sleep until he came back, all worked up from the big news. On the day of the awards, Xiao Lulu was really nervous and headed to the bathroom, where she caught Mom Li Dan arguing with the committee members, begging them to do something. Only then did the musician realize the main contender had been disqualified because of a blade inside the piano, and quickly connecting the dots, she realized the timing matched when her dad left the room. The girl came in 3rd place but couldn't shake that little smile, even though the event didn't make her happy at all. The young lady really hoped her dad wasn't involved in what happened to Li Dan, but hope was fading every second. When the family was packing their bags, the daughter found a whole box of special blades in her dad's suitcase, which caused a huge fight. Dad confessed to all his sins, begged everyone not to say a word, because he just wanted the best for his daughter. Xiao Lulu's parents divorced when he was a kid, and his dad was the only one who cared about his daughter, willing to do anything for her. The guy had to work 3 jobs, didn't even have time to sleep, so his little girl never had a good life. The businesswoman didn't want her dad in jail. She was really worried about him and scared of the consequences for herself. Man gets diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and dies soon after, but the girl feels guilty for the rest of her life even though she wasn't involved. Officer listens to the whole story in silence, while the pianist admits she hasn't touched a musical instrument since then because her conscience won't let her. The heroine promises to hire the best lawyers to protect Li Dan and take care of her mother. The guy keeps listening and watching with a judging look, knowing nothing can undo the damage he's done. Xiao Lulu knows money can't fix everything and didn't expect the criminal to forgive her, but she just wants the girl's life to get worse. Finally, Zhao Yu was happy with the results, cracked the case, and made sure the victim got the justice they deserved. The young folks sat in silence at the cafe, finishing their coffee, until they went their separate ways. That evening, the guy led his colleagues to a karaoke bar as promised, since the past week had been tough and they all deserved a break. Everyone knew the guy had stolen 2 big cases from Team B, and the cops were thrilled because the best detective was now among them. As he sang, his eyes locked onto something special, namely a stunning girl. Van Fei was sitting at the far end of the couch with a drink in hand, and she was especially on fire tonight. The hero was super proud of himself, singing pretty well and couldn't stop glancing at the pretty girl, totally into what he was seeing. Before everyone split up, Li Wei-nai raised a final toast to the solved case and the awesome detective work. A white BMW was pulling away from the restaurant, ferrying guests back to their places. Van Fei, driving the car, was worried about her passenger, wondering if the guy had drank too much tonight during the celebration. Guy smiles, but if he'd gone over his limit, he'd have already been hitting on the pretty girl with kisses. The doctor was surprised by the detective's straightforwardness, and actually found the situation kind of funny, with the girl even admitting her house was way on the other side of the guy's. The officer was worried about what they'd heard, since if they weren't on the same path, the pretty girl had some weird motives, maybe needing something from Zhao Yao. The doctor immediately realized the hero's thoughts were heading in the worst possible direction. Wan Fei told the guy today they pulled a body from Reservoir Q, so to make it to the celebration she had to leave half her work for the evening, and now she's heading back there exactly. The guy was stunned by the girl's appetite since she'd only finished half the autopsy and was clearly a pro at her job. The doctor asked if the detective still wanted to kiss her because she'd touched countless dead bodies with her hands. The guy didn't care because people didn't die just from touching the girl. Plus, the guy said he'd have no complaints if he died from such a magical lady's hands, which really embarrassed the driver. The beautiful woman smiled because she liked the flirtatious confidence of the young guy. There was something innocent about him. The car came to a stop when the girl hit the brakes, and the couple arrived at their destination. Zhao Yu didn't say a word and started getting out of the car, under the intense gaze of the pretty girl. Still not facing the girl, the guy said he had no one at home, hinting at a nice evening alone together. Finally looking at the young woman, the guy offered her to come over, even adding he could pretend to be dead if she wanted to perfect her body skills. Wan Fei smiled at the hero, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and thought for a few seconds about the guy's offer. The doctor's car zooms off super fast, nearly blows a cop off his feet with the wind. Looks like he got his answer. The guy stands on the crosswalk blushing and smiling, eyes locked on the girl he's chasing. Kou recalls how just seconds ago he was confidently inviting the doctor to come over for tea. The girl says no but promises to make it up to him next time, maybe even more than that, when she brings her surgical knife. The detective heads up his apartment stairs when he hears a weird noise that shouldn't be there. A young guy was surprised to see his old friend waiting for him on the top of the stairs. He froze up, couldn't speak, and his mind was completely scrambled from seeing her again. Jiang Ziosen was eating an apple, already waiting for him for a long time because he'd been hard to find lately. The young lady stood up. Every move she made was fueled by anger at the guy who was hanging out while she was searching for him. Kou nervously smiled, trying to explain to his friend that he'd been busy with the investigation case. The girl's anger hit a new level when the guy forgot what he did during the parent-teacher meeting. Tears rolled down the girl's cheeks as she wanted to earn some money to help her family cover the expenses. She didn't get why her request was so complicated that the guy decided to ditch her, even though she trusted him a lot. Jiang Ziosen cried even harder, turning away because if everyone found out what she was doing, she'd lose her chance to keep studying. The hero's heart melted seeing his crying friend, and he wanted to do something to help the situation and ease her tough spot. The girl's face was dry from tears, but her eyes lit up with joy because the guy agreed to come save her. The next day, the student arranged a home visit for her teacher, and the detective had to pretend to be her dad again, but this time she'd be in charge. The older man said the time for high school exams was coming up, and Jiang Ziosen was one of the top students, so the guy, acting as her dad, had to make sure she was taken care of. Just with a glance, the cop asked his partner if her dad would suddenly show up and expose their scam. Everything was good. The guy tracked the real dad's phone with geolocation, and he was supposed to be in the hospital right now. Zhao Yu was bored out of his mind while the girl was handing out fruit to the teacher and didn't know how to pass the time. The detective remembered his trip from the night before and was curious if the doctor had already finished the body dissection and where she was. After the meeting ended, the guy went to the office of Group A, which was the police station. While the medics were discussing work details with the police, a young guy interrupted them, demanding immediate attention. The guy wrapped his arms around the doctor's waist. The officer wanted to help Wan Fei with her new case, and he was really into this case. Zhao Yu asked the doctor if the girl would have time later to talk about the investigation details, but it was pretty clear he was fishing for something. Detective Zin cut him off, saying he had way too much work today and couldn't spare the time. He was told not to worry about the case anymore since Ku Pin and her team were handling it, and he got a new phone to replace the old one he could toss out. The police issued a notice about the training session, which was part of their department's plan, and by the afternoon Zhao Yu was told to grab his stuff and head to the registration desk. At the scheduled time, Detective Zin showed up at the training location to start his duties. Guy couldn't figure out why the system kept giving him weird items like binoculars, status checkers, 3 of them, signal blockers, and air quality detectors. Sometimes just a sneeze from the hero would trigger the system to spit out a new, sometimes confusing trigram. The guy's thoughts led to the appearance of a girl everyone called Sister. A young, fit, and serious-looking babe was heading toward the guy in the gym. The guy almost lost his jaw at the girl's beauty, since he was told she was also a detective and an amazing one at that. The kid poured every ounce of his magic into the air and headed out to meet the new arrival. Kou noticed the lady had just arrived and hadn't seen the pain techniques they'd shown, so he offered to help train her. The beautiful girl stared at the guy in shock, not expecting such boldness from a newbie. The other guys in the hall thought the hero had lost it, since Sister In was a martial arts master, a 2-time sparring champion, and few could even hope to be her match. Officer Ko didn't know that none of the attackers the girl had captured had any chance, and they all ended up crippled. The girl got curious about how fast her new opponent would show up and agreed to the guy's offer. The detective suggested starting by teaching the seemingly innocent girl the thrill of breaking a nose. The guy smiled and lured the girl with a hand gesture, telling his opponent to attack him. Sister swung her fist hard at the smug guy's face area. To everyone's surprise, Zhao Yu managed to stop the champion's attack with his bare hands. The hero grabbed the girl's hand, insisting that the combo he'd shown was super simple, made specifically for beginners. The guy led her through the ending of a police arrest move, showing how to properly hold an opponent's wrist when taking their elbow. The girl smiled, starting to really enjoy the training session because not many could be worthy opponents for her, making this sparring feel fresh and exciting. The girl thought the victory was way too easy for her, which is why she believed she could easily escape from it. The detective found the champion's claim amusing, didn't really believe she could do it, and felt pretty good about it. In the next second, the sister's tightly clenched fist met the guy's face. It was a real ego blow for the guy, who also left a mark on his own face. But that's not all. What he saw next made him sweat like a pig. The cop landed her second hit, this time using her legs after a big spin. Zhao Yu managed to block the girl's punch with his hand at the last second. The guy zoomed through the whole ring, stopping only when he slammed into the barrier behind him. The detective touched his bruised cheek, still not used to taking such heavy hits. Finally, the guy got it why no one else in the crowd dared approach the girl. She looked like a delicate flower from the outside, but was actually a karate champ. Everyone except the hero feared the beauty and kept their distance. That's what the guy figured. The lady smiled and apologized to the guy, hoping he wasn't too mad she'd messed up the force. The girl offered the detective a trade. She'd teach him her favorite hobby, necking. His face darkened, he knew the moves and how to cool down and definitely wanted to show it off. The beauty was flustered, she didn't get what the guy was talking about. Sister took up the baton. If the guy wasn't afraid she'd break his arms, he could attack her. The miss was totally fine with that. Ko lunged forward, but the girl moved her body aside just in time, dodging to the other side. The champion couldn't believe it. The opponent was actually going to slap the pretty girl in the face. The detective smiled. His distraction move worked exactly as planned. The guy grabbed the girl's hand again for the second time during sparring, executing another technique. The guy twisted the girl's upper limbs behind her back, putting her in a position that made a counterattack really hard. Sister realized this time she couldn't easily escape the admiration, but ordered the guy to let her go right away. The detective leaned in real close to the girl's ear, making it look like only she could hear their conversation. The guy told the officer that her hit was too strong and now he couldn't move, which made everyone watching their sparring laugh. The guy stayed way too close to the pretty girl and asked her to call him Brother Yu, promising to teach her all sorts of moves if she wanted. He was still way too close because the female athletes, including her, were starting to get annoyed. The girl swung her head with a big motion, slamming it into Zhao Yu's face and causing him serious pain and suffering. He grabbed his nose and it took the worst of the hit, maybe even broke or got knocked out of place. The guy realized he lost his focus and this could cost him big time. The champion's leg, fast and powerful, was coming down on the detective's head. The young guy snapped back to focus just in time to catch the girl's lower leg. The fight between the two kids was drawing in more and more spectators. The tension was high, sparks flying in all directions. Zhao Yu grinned, mocking her, saying her leg was good but she didn't have the strength to take down the guy with her feet. The girl got more and more frustrated with the guy's behavior, wanting to erase his sleazy grin forever. The champion ripped off her second leg from the mat, ready for a counterattack. The karateka launched into the air, using her lower limbs to choke the guy and slam him onto his back. The guy landed on his back on the ring, pinned under his opponent's weight. Detective's anger flared as he didn't like the situation and refused to back down. The pretty girl locked eyes with the guy, sizing him up like a lion stalking a trapped prey. The guy's mind sparked with a devilish plan to turn the tables, which thrilled him no end. Inchka screamed in pain as the guy's teeth sank into her soft spot. The two wanted to keep fighting on the ring until the coach stopped them, calling their behavior unbecoming of cops. Man gets super annoyed with the guy's stupid behavior in his gym, and tells the guy and his girl to split up and fight in opposite corners of the ring. The champion threatens the guy to stay away from her or else it's gonna end badly for him. The detective wasn't scared off by the girl's empty threats and wanted to tell her the same thing. The rowdy kids got kicked out of the gym and he didn't want to deal with them, so he planned to let their boss handle it. The system told the guy the fight was over with, the completion rate was 51% and he got a night vision device. The hospital building echoed with the voice of the deputy director. He couldn't believe what he'd just heard, probably some really bad joke. The deputy tried to explain to his boss that the guy was still a rookie and had been messing around all day instead of doing his job. His colleague was sure the kid was persistent and his fighting spirit was stronger than any criminal, so he couldn't be underestimated and was perfect for the role. Looking out the window, he told his deputy that he'd already taken care of everything, but first they needed to work a little more on the guy's character. The detective, bored out of his mind, stood by the same house eating a chupa chups. Zhao Yu and his young police partner stood outside the building where the deceased lived, sent to look for clues. Li Wen didn't get why the senior officer didn't back out of the case, since he'd just come back from training and was already assigned to investigate the missing details. The case handed to the police officers was really old, and they'd been unable to solve it for 10 years. The guy thought he could easily handle the old investigation, which had long hit a dead end. When the guy touched the door, he promised his partner he'd treat her to something tasty once they sorted everything out. He walks into an old abandoned building and takes a look around. In front of him, there's a single couch, peeling walls, and a bunch of empty bottles. 10 years ago at 8 p.m., a storm was raging outside, and the victim, UCH Jijen, was lying relaxed on his couch. A blurry figure in green shows up in the alley near the neighborhood where the murder happened. There were no security cameras near the crime scene, so that was the only clue the police had. 40 stabs with a knife killed the victim right away, and that's all the proof pointing to the killer instead of a face or name. No fingerprints or clues about the killer were found at the scene. Not even the door handle was touched, so either the victim opened the door himself or the killer had a key. A message written in the victim's blood on the wall said everyone pays their debts. If the creep wanted revenge, he wouldn't have written the word debt, but if the victim really owed him, there was no need to stab the guy 40 times. The killer left a big puddle of blood and a message that only made more questions than answers. The detective couldn't figure out why the killer targeted this guy specifically and why he ended up getting hurt. The guy got distracted by a phone call while deep in thought. He stared at the new phone screen in shock, totally surprised to see Yaoji calling him out of the blue. The girl wanted to know if he was free, planning to treat him to lunch today. The restaurant they met at served amazing appetizers and even better main courses. The girl had been wanting to invite Zhao Yu over for lunch for a long time, so he wouldn't steal her bag back then. The accessory was super valuable to the beauty since her boyfriend had given her the bag. Even the thought of losing her bag made the girl incredibly sad, and she absolutely refused to lose it under any circumstances. The guy didn't get what Yao Zi was getting at, but subjectively he totally didn't like this conversation. Zhao Yu was enjoying the tasty food, and if the girl had something to say, he'd help however he could. The guy's proposal really got the young lady's hopes up, so she asked the detective to check on her boyfriend. This time the completion percentage was already 59%, and the hero got an invisibility detector, the program told him. Yao Zai was worried her boyfriend might get into trouble because he kept borrowing money from her. The cop told her over the phone while sitting in his car. On the other end of the phone line was Zhang Jinfeng, who was told the guy they needed to track was named Sanji, and he'd call back once there was more info. The detective saw a woman with a kid from his car window. Ling Mei Feng was the wife of the dead Yu Zhaijin and one of the main suspects in his murder. She endured years of abuse from her husband and even had a miscarriage once. The victim once threatened to break the wife's father's leg if her family didn't comply. Ling Mei Feng had an ironclad alibi. She was at the hospital helping her cousin give birth on the night of her husband's death. The next day, when Ling Mei Feng found the body, she was super scared and called the police with help from neighbors. Then she ended up in the hospital with depression after trying to lose herself multiple times. The woman finally recovered and married again, now happily raising her little daughter, but the detective still thought there was a chance she could have been the killer. The specialist called back and said he found the guy they were looking for. Yao Zai's favorite makes defective products at his factory, and today he's heading to the wholesale market to sell them, while Zhang Jinfeng sent the police his location. Zhao Yu arrived at the wholesale market area and activated the GPRS system. The detective heard someone shouting for him to stop behind. A tall man with long hair was being chased and tried to stop by a woman. New police friend from the gym runs after her guy and tells him to stop. The guy stops the crooked guy by sticking his foot out. The guy with long hair faceplants onto the asphalt, and his papers, folders, and random stuff scatter everywhere. The guy leans down to pick up the wallet that caught his interest, even though he still doesn't know who they're arresting. The angry cop pushes the guy out of the way so she can get to the criminal. The elite combat champion pushed off the floor and landed face first on the runner's face. Zhang Yu thought the girl was being reckless, since there was no other reason to hit him at all. The detective shoved aside his colleague who was beating up the guy with long hair. The annoyed guy decided to take his revenge on the unlucky criminal to teach him some manners. The karate girl's anger boiled like laughter, pushing the scum and also her former sparring partner. The cops were going at it with renewed intensity. The guy and the girl were throwing around hot, angry looks, neither willing to back down. It was a major disagreement. In's younger sister went first, leaping up and trying to kick the guy from her feet. Zhang Yu wasn't backing down either, refusing to give in to the karate girl, still remembering their recent sparring. Everyone nearby started gathering to watch the fight between the two kids. The cops were spread out all over the place, but the guy just couldn't stop, because he helped catch the criminal and didn't believe he deserved such a harsh reward. Captain Meow tried to hold on since she already had the criminal in custody, but the girl insisted the guy might be his accomplice. Two guys dragged the thief away, thinking he was just some random guy caught in the middle of the chaos. Inside the wholesale market building, the cops kept arguing, both warning their opponent not to run into them again because they'd regret it. Kou looked at Zanji's coordinates and realized he was wasting time, since he'd forgotten the main thing and the guy had already slipped away. The guy pulled out the wallet he picked up from stopping the guy with long hair, but the pain in his face kept him from focusing on the real deal. The karate girl had a seriously strong punch. The detective checked out the find carefully. This result was better than nothing. The guy pulled a photo of the thief out of the wallet. He couldn't figure out why this guy got in trouble. The guy studied the photo closely. He wanted to know why he was trying to catch the wallet's owner. Under the man's photo, the hero found a surprise, Ling Meifeng's picture. But why the guy had the suspect's photo in his wallet didn't make sense. The guy in the hospital learned the wallet's owner is a 41-year-old man named Lu Pengfei who runs a wholesale clothing business, has over $1 million in savings, and owns 3 houses and 2 cars. The guy asked how the man knew their suspect Zhang Jingfen, and the man said he didn't, but both were from the same city. The blonde guy was shocked. It was the unsolved case that's been open for 10 years, and Zhao Yu just picked up the wallet and found proof. He was really lucky. The system said the meeting went well, completion was at 80%, and the guy got an invisible listening device. The hero looked at the found photo and realized it was taken secretly, so the officer decided to talk to the wallet owner. If he kept the photo of the girl, maybe he was secretly in love with her. The cops said they lifted prints from the wallet and checked the criminal record, and the guy's already been under investigation a few times for minor offenses. This time he stabbed someone and the U department's handling it. The cops needed to figure out who the offender was, but he was held in another department, so Li Weini asked if anyone there knew someone. Everyone in the room turned their gaze toward Zhao Yuo. The young guy got the hint without a word, but the idea totally sucked for him. The U department was close by, so the guy got there pretty quick. Detective gave the local workers a friendly smile, even though he didn't really want to be in the building right now. The elite combat champion couldn't believe the guy had the nerve to show up again, causing trouble. The young man got up close to Captain Meow, who said it looked like he was a psycho, but he came for the case, not to ask personal questions. The beauty refused the guy's interrogation request from Lu Penfei, saying he needed to bring all official documents first before they could even talk about his request. Getting the official papers would take at least a month, but Zhao Yu didn't have that much time, so he offered to help with something else instead. The detective still had his hand on Captain Meow's arm, and remembered how last time during sparring she let herself be bit. The guy was surprised, like, was the cop still mad about his little joke? Meow pushed the guy away and said anyone can interrogate a suspect except the guy. The beauty pointed the detective to the exit and told him not to show up at her precinct again. The guy smiled, but it wasn't the result he was hoping for. Zhao Yu stood in the middle of the area, thinking about what other options he had to get to the suspect. The fight between the two young guys drew in a bunch of bystanders, who didn't get why this guy showed up out of nowhere and dared to anger Captain Meow. The detective took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and the girl clearly didn't want to help at all. Walking toward the exit, the brunette asked if the girl believed he could cut off the whole department from the world. The kid had superpowers and could make the whole building go dark and leave phones without signal. The girl froze in shock, not knowing what was happening after the unexpected twist. A wave of laughter rolled through the division. Nobody believed the guy's powers, thinking he was either sick or just imagining things. Miao Yin got excited and promised to let the guy into the criminal's hideout if he could disable the whole building's alarm. The two kept locking eyes, neither willing to back down. The detective tapped the girl's shoulder, hoping she'd keep her promise. The champion got upset over the guy's closeness, but he said it was time to cast the spell. While the karate girl ordered her partner to bring in a signal detector, the guy launched an invisible blocker. The guy stuck his fingers in his ear and started shouting that Captain Meow was an idiot. The girl started losing her cool, like, was this guy really trying to end his own life? Captain heard the signal disappear in the building, and that kinda cooled her down. The cops were worried because the whole lower floor of the house had no signal, and nobody knew how that was possible. The karate girl checked her phone, hers was out too, and her assistant reported the detector couldn't find a signal. The beauty shot the guy a doubtful look. She couldn't believe it was even possible. Zhao Yu grinned, maybe now he'd get to interrogate the suspect. The suspect in Lu Penfei's murder sat in the interrogation room. The criminal didn't expect the door to burst open with a loud bang, and a stranger young guy walked through the opening. The detective stared at the suspect, finally getting that face-to-face meeting. The guy felt a strong push in his back, causing him to lose his balance. Right behind the guy, Captain Meow entered the interrogation room and he blocked her path. The champion looked at the hero and couldn't figure out how he managed to shut off the signal. Something was definitely off with this guy. The system helped the guy again. The officer seemed to actually believe in his superpowers. Good thing he had an invisible signal jammer. This time the detective tried a different device, specifically an invisible lie detector. KOU ordered the criminal to answer his questions with either yes or no, which really caught the martial artist's attention. The first question put the murder suspect in a light daze. The hero asked if the man was the killer. The prisoner honestly answered the question, and the system lit up a green button. The guy kept pressing the next question, asking if the long-haired woman was a woman, and he honestly answered. Answering the next question didn't bother the criminal either, since his real name was Lu Penfei. The guy then asked if his opponent liked cake. The interrogation went on, and the criminal said his parents never divorced. Finally, Zhao Yu asked if it was really coffee or if the prisoner killed Yu Zhaijin. The guy who lost his wallet froze in fear. Sweat dripped down his face as he didn't expect that question during a simple interrogation. The criminal's nerves snapped, his heart pounding out of his chest as he screamed that it wasn't true. The detective's first red light of the day flashed, signaling something was definitely wrong. The detective didn't like that answer, stood up, stared at the prisoner, and loudly declared all his words were lies. He grabbed the criminal by the collar, demanding to know if he knew the wife of the dead Lin Meifeng. But Captain Miao got worried and ordered him to let go of his husband. The girl didn't get why the guy was so worked up after a few questions. Was that guy really responsible for the crime from 10 years ago? In's sister couldn't figure out what the guy knew for sure. To get his thoughts straight, the detective started drawing a turtle on a piece of paper. The guy found the same killer. He was sitting right across from him. KOU glares at the same criminal but doesn't have any proof yet. The guy turned around and knew he had to find a way to get Yu Chaijin to confess. The detective watched through the glass door as Miao Yin talked to one of her colleagues in the hall. A clever plan popped into his head on how to get the killer to spill the beans. The hero approached the champion and asked for a few minutes of her time to discuss an urgent matter. The girl gave an unexpectedly gentle smile and agreed without any argument. Guy didn't get why the captain suddenly started acting so friendly toward him. Miao Yin pulled out a photo from the archive with the message left at the crime scene in FM. Champion placed the photo in front of the prisoner and asked why the handwriting on the wall matched his 91%. She also mentioned that the height of the dark figure caught on surveillance cameras that night matched the criminal exactly. Detectives thought the guy did everything possible to avoid leaving any evidence or fingerprints behind. The cops found the only evidence that wasn't the victim's, which was the killer's hair matching the DNA of the jailed guy. The scared criminal looked at the cops, not expecting the 10-year-old case to come up during today's interrogation. The long-haired guy was terrified, which was impossible because the cops had framed him, and his wife needed to meet her lawyer ASAP. The detective watched the scene in front of him with a blank expression. Miao Yin looked at the guy, and with one glance told them trying to get a confession that way wouldn't work and thought about leaving the suspect alone. The guy had a whole different plan, time to pull out the last trick from his sleeve. KOU pressed up against the criminal in the shelter and showed him a photo. Besides the physical evidence, they had something else. The photo showed Lin Meifeng. The guy said the girl agreed to testify against the killer. Blood drained from Lu Pengfei's face. He sat pale as a wall. No way the dead man's wife had told everything. One thought hit both cops at once. They didn't get what the prisoner was talking about. He figured he could pull off a little trick and asked if the criminal had figured out everything from their conversation. Captain Miao recently asked for info on the guy and found out he'd cracked 2 crimes and even earned a thank you. But they still put him on the old 10-year-old case, probably because of his explosive temper. 15 minutes earlier, the guy walked up to the champion and said he was sure their jailed killer had set up the whole act for him. Zhao Yu suggested working on the evidence a bit more to make the criminal sweat, but he still needed the guy to confess on his own. Out of nowhere, Lu Penfei spoke up, saying everything was true. The officers were shocked when their plan worked, and the criminal confessed to killing Yu Chaijin. The young guys exchanged a look, proud as hell because they managed to squeeze a confession out of the killer. The prisoner kept talking, revealing how he and the victim's wife made a pact to swap murders. The detectives didn't expect this at all. The info came from the killer's sincere confession, not a tip. The happy mom with a kid who Zhao Yu watched from his car was also a cold-blooded killer. Yu Chaijin and the prisoner went to the same middle school together. The guy who lost his wallet was in love with a girl named Xiao Qing. The dead guy managed to win Xiao Qing's heart and spread rumors about her like wildfire, making it seem like she was already with him, and his lies spread like a forest fire through the whole town. Xiao Qing couldn't take the constant gossip behind her back. Xiao Qing had to drop out of school and move to another city to find a job. Word got around that Lu Penfei's lover was working as a prostitute, so he figured the dead guy definitely deserved it. The captain figured the killer asked Lin Meifeng to go to his place and let her wife Jian Wenli die. Finally, the detective got why Miao Yin suddenly changed her attitude and started helping. She needed to make the prisoner confess to another crime. The elite combat champ wanted to know why Lu Penfei ordered his wife's murder. The guy had wanted his wife dead from the start, the one he married. Jian Wenli never respected the prisoner and kept cheating on him with other guys. The family's job and house were all set up by the killer's father-in-law, and he was just the wife's maid cleaning up trash. Liu Penfei saw a movie where people made contracts to exchange murders. The long-haired guy found Lin Meifeng, who had been taking abuse from her husband for a long time, so he knew she hated him deep down, and that's how the prisoner could get revenge for Xiao Qing's fate and kill his wife. The woman rejected the proposal and the matter had to be postponed, but hope still burned in the man's heart. Yu Chijijin beat his wife almost to death, which caused her to miscarry, and she ended up confronting the killer herself. The informants signed a pact and even recorded everything on a dictaphone to have dirt on each other. Jian Wen was arrested at the factory on the day of his death, and when Yu Chijijin died, his wife was in the hospital helping a relative give birth, so both had alibis. The prisoner lived pretty well for the last 10 years and now, after confessing everything, even felt a sense of relief. The detectives listened to this story about the murders and had nothing more to add. The detectives' team celebrated closing the murder case in the Alley FM. The colleagues praised the detective, since no one but him could solve the case in 10 years, and even they couldn't believe such scenarios happened outside movies, thinking the kid was like Sherlock Holmes from another universe. The system said the case was 90% complete, and the kid got 3 invisible surveillance cameras. A few hours ago, the colleagues shook hands. Their teamwork turned out to be surprisingly fun. Mei Yin promised to report the details of 2 cases to their superiors, and the young people will keep working together to solve these cases. They swapped phones and promised to send each other all the case details. Kou darkened, thinking he'd have to issue an arrest order for Lin Meifeng. The karate girl didn't get why the guy's mood had suddenly shifted. The girl looked at the detective and asked what was bothering him. The guy couldn't believe the killer was also the victim's wife, a woman who'd gone through a lot after her husband's death. Captain Miao didn't want to jump to conclusions, so the suspect had to come to the station first before they could get all the details on the crime. Kou couldn't forget his recent opponent, who turned out to be not only beautiful but also really smart. The guy was thinking about the soft hands and smooth skin of the girl when his phone started ringing. On his phone screen was the face of the beauty asking him to come over right away. It was already late at night, but some lights were still on in the U precinct building as the cops worked on urgent cases. The detective sprinted down the hallway after the call, desperate to get to the champion, even hailing a taxi to make it there faster. The guy was out of breath and flushed, and the girl even thought he was drunk, but he just wanted to know what happened and why the beauty called him over. The cop recently questioned Lin Meifeng, who said she really used a knife to kill Jian Wenli, but the autopsy report showed the woman died from suffocation. Zhao Yu felt pretty rough, but he made the driver go as fast as possible, so his head was bouncing around. Miao Yin didn't notice the guy's condition and kept going on about how the victim really had knife wounds, but they were shallow, and if the suspect knew everything, she had no reason to lie. Someone else might have killed the girl, and there's still a mystery. Footprints were found at the scene, but the woman said she wore slippers before entering the house. The guy was about to throw up from hearing the plan, but the crime report showed both the western and eastern bedrooms were ransacked. The guy kept his composure but figured there was a third person in the house during the murder. Captain In thought the victim might have been strangled first, then the suspect stabbed her again, maybe thinking she was already dead, but she wasn't. The girl finally noticed the detective's bad condition. His face was green. Zhang Yu couldn't hold it in anymore and spilled everything he'd eaten and drunk in the last few days. Miao Yinbu was super mad that the guy's stomach contents ended up on her clothes and shoes. She blasted the whole building with her angry voice, totally fed up with having to change clothes. In the interrogation room, the detective with a headache asked to answer a few questions. The cop asked Lin Meifeng to answer the questions, and she had to either confirm or deny everything. The first question was whether the woman killed the victim, and she said yes. The lie detector lit up red, but no one knew why the woman would lie about that. The detective asked if the victim was stabbed and the prisoner said yes, but that was a lie. The guy didn't know if she really believed what she was saying or if she was covering for the real killer. The hero asked the new mother if she knew who killed Jian Wenli, which really surprised her. Zhao Yu realized the answer had to be either yes or no. Lin Meifeng said yes, but the system called every answer a lie. The detective was shocked to find out the woman really didn't know who the killer was. The guy needed to know if the victim was already dead when the woman stabbed her. The widow of the man killed in the alley didn't know why the cop was asking such weird questions and had no idea what to say to the last one. So she admitted she was really scared and just stabbed the blanket a few times, but no one moved. The detective said nothing and just stared silently at the accused. Kou smiled and the woman mistakenly believed she had killed Lin Meifeng, but that meant the real killer was still out there. The pair went to the rooftop to discuss everything they'd learned, and Miao Yin thought it made sense to close the case since the accused had already confessed. The guy didn't like that plan because both of them had heard that when the woman stabbed the blanket, they didn't even know if the victim was still alive at the time. The detective figured out that closing the case now would make things way easier. They'd get medals and rewards, but if they didn't, they'd be stuck working all hours or chasing the killer forever. The girl kept going, saying that 10 years had passed, and if they reopened the case now, the victims' families would never stop pushing until they got the truth. The champion shared her opinion and wanted to know what the guy planned to do next with the case. He smiled, already knowing exactly what to say about it. Kou studied his former rival, realizing she wasn't telling him everything if she wanted to close the case. But if Maoyan's story was true, she wouldn't have called the hero so late at night. The cop got flustered when the guy caught her in the act. She decided not to lose face completely, and admitted she already regretted calling the guy because he had dumped her whole stomach contents on her. The guy hoped the martial artist wouldn't hold a grudge, and they'd team up to catch the real killer together. In the morning, the murder suspect from the District FM was transferred to Unit A, and the U Division is now looking for the one who killed his wife, asking to keep him in another place for now while they investigate the case. The detectives saw a big crowd running off through the window. Lee Waney told the chief that the suspect in the Q Reservoir case was a track athlete, and last time when the police caught him, they only managed to put one set of handcuffs on him. The police got a report saying that 2 days ago someone in handcuffs was seen near the Q Reservoir, matching the description of Yan Wentao, and everyone rushed to catch him. The detective figured out why the suspect might have gone back to the crime scene. The tricky weaver said there were a lot of villages near the reservoir, so it would take a long time to find the fugitive, so the kid decided to leave too, but he was told the chief wanted to see him. Zhao Yu needed to catch the criminal, but he was only thinking about the investigation and promotion, not really caring about the guy at all. The guy was driving to Reservoir Q for 3 days, thinking the system was only giving him navigation, which made him worry the hero might get lost. Lee Waney, who was in the car with the older sibling, was surprised they were heading east when the villagers said they'd seen Yan Wentao heading west. The guy figured the criminals hadn't seen a clear picture, so maybe he was moving from the west side to the east. The police had already searched north and south of the reservoir but found nothing. The detective saw a girl who looked familiar, like someone he'd seen before. The young lady reminded him of someone from Maoyan's circle, someone he'd seen in the U department last time. Kou didn't get why the girl would forget this place. The young woman already thanked Officer Liu and was about to head to her parked car. A young guy appeared in front of the red-haired woman, curious about who she was talking to. The girl got so scared from the near-death encounter, she screamed all the way down the street, clutching her favorite pen like it was her lifeline. The guy was super mad but still told her he'd met the detective who once worked on Jian Wenli's case, now retired and living in that area. The detective remembered Captain Miao had promised to send people to talk to the officers who worked on their case, but he'd been too busy lately to even get in touch with her. Kou decided to ask the cop about the investigation progress, since that's what the karate girl promised to send him. If the girl stayed quiet, the guy would just take her pen recorder and grab all the conversation he needed. The red-haired team captain told the guy not to share info because they'd agreed to work together, but he ran off to hunt the criminal on the reservoir and was way too busy. The guy's plan backfired when the girl snatched back her own stuff. The lady said she had the right to keep her info private and planned to stick to that. Kou was confused, not getting why they needed to hide details when both were already involved. As she was getting into her car, the red-haired one added that the guy could ask their captain for any questions. The guy wouldn't let the girl open the car door. He wasn't about to just give up that easy. He pinned the young lady against the car door, telling her no one could say no to him when he wanted something. The assistant kept interrupting the couple's fight, which surprised the young people who forgot they were in a crowded place. While the junior cop asked why they stopped, the red-haired one already got into her car. Her car drove off, making the cops watch as the driver weaved through traffic. While the young guys were distracted by the helper, the guy pulled out a voice recorder from the worker's pocket at the U department. The guy smiled, but the red-haired girl was still too young to play with such toys. Kou was driving and listening to the stolen recording, figuring out the killer was at least 1 meter 88 centimeters tall and limped on the right leg. The police also learned from the recording that Jian Wenli had small dirt patches on her body, meaning the killer probably pinned her against the wall before suffocating her. The peaceful car ride got interrupted by the guy's phone ringing. Miao Yin called in a super angry tone, demanding her colleague's stolen property be returned immediately. Li Wenyi was really worried, but tried hard to act casual as a detective. Kou used a totally innocent voice to tell Captain Yu that nothing was said, and he had nothing to do with the incident. The champion was serious, no jokes. She told that Lin Meifeng's stationery store was destroyed, and someone set fire to Liu Penfei's warehouse. The beauty demanded the detective go back because the victims' families were getting restless. They wanted the real criminal caught fast. The guy promised to return as soon as he finished his work, but for now he had the files. The cop stopped at the gas station to refuel and grab some food. The officer handed the recorder back to the red-haired colleague and warned him to be careful, since there were tons of cliffs around. The The girl yelled at the guy to watch his step as she was driving away, because he didn't know the area and she really didn't want him to fall off a cliff and everyone having to search for his body. The guy was calmly eating ice cream, listening to his colleague's rant while watching the car pull away. The detective had a terrible thought as he kept replaying the girl's words in his head about how he didn't know the area. The hero told Li Wenyi to check as fast as possible what the suspect was up to. The assistant found out Yan Wentao was a clerk at a tech bureau, and the detective noticed the suspect might have been involved in land research projects and possibly visited their office. Kou knew the criminal was familiar with the area, which is why he was hiding by the reservoir. The guy asked his assistant if the suspect had been involved in any large-scale research projects related to the Q reservoir. The girl found the killer was linked to a reform project at an old silver mine near Village Y. He worked on it for 3 years and was there often. The assistant was surprised by the senior's intuition because the Village Y was close to their location. The detective was happy with himself and suggested they head out to find the criminal right away. The young people stopped for the night at a hotel, but since there were almost no free rooms, they had to share one. Li Wenyi asked the leader if he planned to sleep since it was already late at night outside, but the guy was too focused on the map. Zhang Yu left his room to not disturb his colleague, thinking the criminal was searching for silver and knew about the caves in the mines where he could hide while eating a nice dinner. There were too many old mines around them and their search could take decades. The guy heard a loud bark somewhere near his own feet. The hungry dog looked at the guy with sad eyes. The detective realized the dog really wanted to eat his incredibly tasty and aromatic dinner. With no other choice, the hero went to a 24-hour store near the motel to buy another serving of chicken thighs for his new friend. The red dog jumped right in for the treat. The guy figured Yan Wentao probably needed to eat something and maybe was hiding only at night, going to town during the day for food. The kid pulled out a photo of the suspect from his pocket and showed it to the dog, which would have definitely helped find the killer if it was a police dog. The full-fed pup opened one eye happily, staring at the photo. Zhao Yu was laughing at himself for being so reckless. A new friend suddenly ran into the woods, dragging the confused cop along with them. The detective was running through the dark bushes after the dog, not expecting it to actually find the criminal. Once the dog reached its target, it stopped to wait for the new friend. The guy was totally wiped out from chasing the runaway animal, breathing hard and sweating all over. The treasure the dog led the guy to completely flipped him out. The detective was left with animal crap after a failed chase. A metallic clang in the middle of a quiet forest hit the hero like thunder out of nowhere. Kou shone his phone light on the spot where the sound came from and saw a guy running away fast. The fugitive's wrist was clearly visible with metal cuffs. The detective remembered Li Wenyi's words about the suspect being a truancy athlete who once escaped by getting only half the cuffs on, so he was definitely still free. The guy finally smirks. This time the criminal won't get away with just a slap on the wrist. Yan Wentao hides in the familiar cave and pulls out a knife, knowing his pursuer's getting closer. The forest gets too quiet, and the killer peeks out to see where the guy disappeared to. The detective waits for the criminal to lose a little focus and takes him down with one kick to the gut. Kou can't let the ex-clerk outsmart him again and decides to keep him locked up for good. The criminal tried to grab the weapon he dropped during his fall. The guy caught Yan Wentao's move just in time and pinched his nose with 2 fingers. The killer flew several meters and slammed into the rocky walls of the cave. The detective grabbed his head, the world started spinning around him and the ground under his feet was moving, but he couldn't keep up. A new friend of the boy yelled at the entrance of the cave, but he wasn't in a hurry to go deeper. The system flickered red, warning they needed to get out fast because of low oxygen. Kou slung another handcuff around the criminal's wrist. The guy dragged the barely conscious prisoner to the exit. They had to get out of the cave fast. Something new caught the guy's attention. A medium-sized black bag was hidden among the rocks. When the trio finally reached a place with decent oxygen levels, the detective realized his phone had no signal and needed to come up with a plan to get out fast. Good thing Zhao Yuo found a hidden GPS with a signal booster in his pocket. The detective sent Peng Xing his location and heard that help was already on the way, arriving in about 2 hours, so he relaxed a bit. The guy's attention was drawn to the find, and since he had plenty of time, he decided to check it out. The bag looked really big, so the guy got curious about what was inside. Tara's bag was packed full of thick stacks of bills. The satchel had at least 100,000 in really old bills, and the hero thought their value should be at least double. He glanced back at the cave, not knowing how such a huge pile of money could have ended up in the old abandoned mine. Kou held a photo showing him with the captured criminal. The police arriving to arrest the fugitive were surprised how the guy managed to catch him, since locals had seen the killer heading west, but they were east of the reservoir. The detective, still holding the bag, told his colleagues that Li Wenyi was still in the hotel room 212, and asked them to grab her on the way home since he was tired and ready to head out. The guy with the dog was sitting in the car, trustingly looking into the guy's eyes. The hero took a heavy breath and opened his car door so the dog could get in. The guy and his dog drove home through the rocky canyon terrain. As the friends climbed the stairs, the system announced they received an invisible X-ray machine for 10 minutes of use. Today's program actually saved a guy's life and got him out of a tough spot. The red dog was the first up the stairs and started sniffing at a woman's shoe that shouldn't be there. The girl with bruises and out cold sat in the hallway, leaning against the wall. Chia Yu's shock was real. The guy had no idea what was going on. The stranger started coming to when she caught a strong, unpleasant smell. The girl saw a big snout sniffing her first, even though her vision wasn't clear yet. She screamed in fright, trying to back away from the strange dog. The detective asked why she was sleeping in the hallway at this late hour when he opened the door. The young lady forgot her keys inside and just decided to sit by the door waiting for her roommate, then accidentally fell asleep. Kou gave her another suspicious look, noticing wounds on her face, maybe from beating. The guy opens his apartment door and invites the neighbor from the stairwell in for a break. A strong stream of water sprays out from the shower head. The new acquaintance asks the detective about his dog's name, while the fluffy cutie is in the bathtub. The guy keeps eating a banana and says his dog's name is Lenavi Specialis. Because of the water flow, the girl misses what he says and thinks he called the dog Zamateuschi Specialis. The detective's new best friend was already dry and rough. After the bath, the dog turned out to be surprisingly handsome, a big dog on long legs with thick fur. The neighbor told the guy his pet was a Belgian shepherd or just a Malinois, which the police often used as search dogs. The girls at home bred different dog breeds, so she knew them all well. While a random acquaintance grabbed a snack, the guy asked her if she knew how old the four-legged one was. The girl checks her red-haired friend again, who looks about 2 or 3 years old. The detective's door knocks and the neighbor rushes to open it, sure it's for her. The neighbor in the girl's room is worried, not knowing why and just waiting for her on the stairs, because if she hadn't heard the voice, she probably wouldn't have stopped by. To the detective's surprise, the neighbor turns out to be his old friend he once saved from the electroshock attacker. The beauty realizes her roommate is completely soaked and totally misreading the situation. The girl tried to explain she was just helping the guy with his dog, so she got a little discouraged and realized there was nothing between them, but it was too late. The guy didn't want things to turn out like this. His intentions were as good as they could be. The next day, the cop invited his assistant to Hogo's restaurant, where she complained she hadn't finished her report on the FM district murder case, but the senior officer had already caught the suspect at Q Reservoir. Li Wenyi's fingers were already calloused from the fishing, and she couldn't keep up with the speed of catching the criminals. But now the team added a new worker, and Captain Ku Pin asked her to help orient the new guy. The second team cracked the elderly home robbery case. The suspect was the security guard, who saw the director collecting donations and storing them in his office, then changed the camera angles and hid the money in the basement. The cops were thrown off because there were no records of the robbery, and the captain immediately realized it was one of their own. But when they started questioning one of the guards, they found a fresh stack of keys, including a copy of the director's office in the basement. While the detectives talked behind them, the restaurant director was being forced to sell his business, but he didn't want to part with his family's place and begged the thugs not to come back. One of the extortionists tried to kick out a customer, but the guy wasn't leaving until he finished his meal. Shards of glass from the broken beer can flew in all directions. The gang really didn't like the stubborn customer because he overheard their conversation with the director. The criminal was losing it. His temples were throbbing, and he wanted to end this with the guy who kept sticking his nose into other people's business. The man in the fancy suit's eyes went wide when he realized things were going completely sideways from the lunch break he thought he'd have. Meanwhile, the bureau chief told everyone that the head of the main office, Su Yan, was heading to the R department soon, so they needed to finalize the job assignments for the next few months and fully support him. Su Yan really wanted to meet the detective, but he and Li Wenyi had already left. The cops were gossiping in the courtyard about the head of the bureau. Everyone wanted to know what he'd be doing, but no one even knew how he looked, though rumors said he was a tall, red-faced guy. A guy's lunch flew past his face in the restaurant. A hot burger burned one of the gangsters' face really bad. The criminal turned around and saw Zhao Yao fuming behind him. The guy stared at the main hiding spot and told him if he came to eat, he should do it, but if he was after something else, he better scram from the restaurant. The guy offered the gangsters another option. They could eat their lunch in the police station's cell. The guy's words really spooked the man, and he realized the kid was an officer, so he knew it was time to ditch the place. Walking back to his spot, the guy complained to his assistant that he couldn't even finish his meal in peace, but she was on the phone and promised someone the couple was about to leave. Kou kept complaining he couldn't finish his meal, since they were being called to the station where they'd be introducing a new head of the Oversight Bureau soon. At the R station, the chief thanked Su Yan for his great speech and for coming to them. The precinct chief promised to fully support the man and help out in the future if needed, or just give him advice. Word got around that the red-faced guy had some guy named Zhao Yu working in the police department, and he'd cracked a bunch of cases straight up, making him almost a legend in certain circles. The The guy was on the phone during the welcome speech for the new boss, urgently asking to check who made a copy of the keys to the victim's house, Jian Wenli. The guy didn't get why everyone was staring at him so weird, since he wasn't doing anything special, just doing his job. A recent friend from the restaurant approached him to say hi, and told him they'd be working together now since he'd been transferred recently. The detective shook hands with the head of the department, which was a nice second meeting. The cops were shocked the guys knew each other, and Su Yan promised to take the boy to dinner because it kept his face intact. The guy was heading up the stairs to his apartment after work when he heard a group of guys trying to break into Xiao Yu's place. These were the same guys who beat up his neighbor a few days ago because they thought the girl should be grateful her friend Hun liked her. The guy was really fed up with the group because they dared to show up at the girl's place and break down her door after everything they'd done. Zhao Yu's fists were shaking from seeing the scene. The outlaws also spotted the guy watching them closely. The guy introduced himself as Tianlu and asked which man was the leader of the pack because he wanted to get to know him. Big Brother Hun from District C stepped forward, and the gang was curious where their new acquaintance came from since no one had ever heard of him before. The guy heard the best stuff in District C was the best, and even Big Brother Hun couldn't afford it, but the gang disagreed because all the best stuff belonged to their boss. He went along with all their tricks to record their confessions on a dictaphone. The detective smirked. He'd heard everything needed for the recording and the police. The guy, known as Tianlu to the others, asked if his name would become just as famous in the neighborhood if he crushed the main gangster's face, crushing fists. The roommates stood outside the door trying to hear what was going on in the hallway, but all they could hear were some weird sounds of punches. The girls figured the sounds had died down and decided to peek through the door to see if the gangsters had left. The detective had already sent the recording to the police station, and they were on their way to pick up the gangsters scattered throughout the hallway. Talks about selling drugs and violence against women are enough to lock a guy up for good. The ladies were super grateful to Zhao Yu for saving them, not sure what would have happened if the guy hadn't arrived in time. The guy said his services weren't free and they'd have to pay up real soon. The guy told the girls they'd go to the room and clean up and get themselves together. The ladies were scared by his words because he said they'd have to work hard to earn his help and didn't know what was in store. Guy's lying on the bed getting a massage from the girls he saved when Miao Yin walks into the apartment. He's really freaked out seeing the police captain at his place, not sure why she's there or what she wants. The champion is super mad at the picture in front of her, not getting how such a shameless girl could be. She explains she's heading to the station to chat with the new chief, and needs him to come too to help with Jian Wenli's lawsuit. The woman notices the detectives a bit preoccupied and probably can't leave with her. The guy stammered he was totally free, and in a minute he changed clothes and was ready to accompany his colleague. The young guys were heading down the pretty high staircase from the guy's apartment. The hero kept throwing quick glances at his ex-rival to figure out his partner's mood. The guy thought Captain In got more beautiful with every encounter. His cheeks turned red and his thoughts got more honest by the minute. Guy wanted to use his X-ray machine on his cop friend. Woman noticed her colleague's blatant stare, which didn't sit well with her since the girl was still stuck in the compromising situation she'd found the guy in. Detective sat in the car and changed the subject, asking what would happen to Lin Mei Feng when they caught the real killer. Captain In replied they'd see what the court decided, since her intent was still malicious. The man on trial said to hire the best lawyer, probably getting her out with a decent result. People in the restaurant were talking about a killer named Aizhen who limped on his right leg and came from the same village as Jian Wenli, with his brother working at a clothing factory and knowing the family was super rich. While the guy tried to sneak some vitamins into the girl's bowl behind them, the conversation turned to how one of the killers recognized Lu Pinfei's husband when he came to get a key and made a copy, with the brothers planning to rob the house. The upset champion dumped her leftovers into the stunned guy's bowl. A cop asked Zhao Yu how he figured out the killer was the man who made key copies. The guy explained that during the interrogation, Lin Mei Feng said the door to Jian Wenli's house was locked, so it didn't make sense how the killer got in. Detective couldn't find any signs of a break-in, which meant the killer had keys to the house, so the big question was where he got them, and that pointed suspicion straight at the guy making copies. Captain Miao praised Officer Zhou's sharp mind and said their department really needed detectives like him. The guy grinned at his partner's obvious flattery, since compliments, even if they weren't totally sincere, always made him feel good. The lady also mentioned she'd been over to the guy's place recently and ran into two of his girlfriends, one giving him a back massage, the other doing his feet, but the guy was still grumpy about it. The hero couldn't tell if the karate instructor was just trying to compliment him or if she was being totally sarcastic. The guy decided to keep the playful tone of the conversation and told the story about Captain Miao being a martial arts master. So strong was her sparring that she beat up the guy so hard he had to bite her to get out of his awe. The guy's monologue pushed his partner to the edge. Miao In kicked the detective out of the room with a kick to the backside and told him never to run into her again. The guy pulled out his phone, confused by the girl since she was the one who started it and somehow got upset over a simple joke. In the area where the cop pulled out a cafe, there was no way to even call a taxi, so the guy had to walk a really long way on foot. Zhao Yu couldn't figure out what the pretty girl meant. Was he really that annoying that the karate girl didn't want to see him anymore? The guy saw a couple of celebrating guys at the store, totally stealing his attention. The hero's smile got huge. He was exactly looking for helpers for his new mission, and the guy just happened to be in the right place at the right time. The detective interrupted the guy's conversation, which didn't go over too well. The guy pointed at a parked car nearby and said the owner often humiliated him, so he asked his friends to drench the car with their water guns as a lesson for the girl. The guy offered to pay $500 in cash for the service. The guys thought the guy was a little weird, but when it came to money, principles took a backseat. One of the partners headed toward Captain's car since he really needed to take a leak. The guy kept glancing around to make sure no one saw him in that compromising position. Yellow liquid poured out of the car's wheels. Double Champion sees someone spinning around her car from the window, which really ticks her off. To keep the detective busy, the girl forces the bandits to polish her car to a shine or face bad consequences. They hear screaming from the neighboring building, their friend Gao, and decide to check out what's going on outside. The guy decides to get a closer look at the house where people are running out of. The room looked weird with tons of old book boxes and weird artifacts laying around. The guy couldn't believe these people were smugglers. The detective had no time to check out the building since a big crowd of people was heading toward the police, and it looked like the guy had gone too far this time. The hero was pushing through a crowd of angry guys who wanted to take it out on the girl, trying to help her deal with the mess he created. Miao Yin didn't need help. She was scattering the attackers in all directions without giving them a chance. A mysterious guy lifted a chair over the beautiful girl's head, which she didn't notice. A chair leg whizzed past the karate girl's face. The cop turned around and saw Zhao Yu deflecting the attacker from her, surprised by the kid's bold move. The lady was stunned, not getting why the detective was helping her get out of this mess. The karate girl was fighting off the attackers using all her martial arts skills. A bunch of the criminals regretted messing with the cop captain, knowing she was a soft target. The girl dodged the fists flying at her from all sides without mercy. The guys worked together, covering each other's backs. The detective was surprised when Captain hit him in the face with an elbow strike. The elite fighter with the latest look apologized to the guy and said she just didn't see him. Kou couldn't figure out why his ex-opponent hit him again in the face. He tried to help, but the girl didn't like that. He's got a broken nose, and the name Miao Yin is echoing in his head like a broken record. He pushed the attacker away, but his real target was the pretty girl who'd messed him up both face and pride. He was throwing the goons around like they were stuffed animals, but they still weighed something and weren't just floating through the air. The girl was on full alert when someone grabbed her shoulder from behind out of nowhere. Kou pulled the girl close, wrapped his arms around her, and kissed her lips like he'd been waiting for this moment. Captain's eyes flew open as she didn't expect her toughest sparring partner to ever kiss her so tenderly. The girl had no clue what was going on, or why the detective acted that way in the middle of the fight. The cop's face tightened up because now wasn't the time or place for any romance. The lady shoved the guy away hard, and the detective's actions really bugged her. The guy was really troubled by the champion's moves, his whole body locked in deep sadness and regret. Their team was already rushing to help, but they had no idea what was going on or who these people around them were, and Zhao Yu's kiss on Captain Miao's lips was a big mistake. The hero gave the order to arrest the attackers in a voice that wasn't his own, because they were involved in smuggling. The girl watched the detective as he showed the arriving police where the criminals were burying all the stolen goods. The beauty clamped her lower lip between her teeth hard, not wanting everything to turn out this way. The guy was definitely out of his mind to do something like that right in the middle of the street. Zhao Yu let his emotions take over at home and started pounding the walls like crazy, not caring if he broke them. The guy stared at his reflection in the mirror, realizing he was an idiot for thinking Mao Yin would just give him a kiss that easy. The detective berated himself for his stupid move, knowing it could have gone way worse for both of them. The pretty girl could get hurt because of the guy's recklessness, since they were still in the middle of the fight. Zhao Yu wasn't the street thug he used to be and now had to think about what he was doing, since every move had consequences. As he stepped out of the shower, the guy checks his phone and sees a message from his neighbor Yan Hun. The girl texts that she and her friend are scared of the boss Hun's revenge, but the guy didn't expect to find them in his bed with all his stuff packed. The neighbors figured it was safer to crash at the detective's place for now. The girl's peacefully sleeping in his bed, clearly already used to the setup. The guy can't believe the girls just decided to break into his apartment and stay there full time. The guy had a serious problem figuring out where to sleep since the bed was already taken. He was super tired from the tough day and really wanted to crash in his comfy bed, so he just landed between the girls, crushing them with his body. It was a deep dark night outside, and everyone was asleep except one person in an apartment building. The neighbors tossed the guy off the bed in the middle of the night, not letting him get any rest. The detective brought a big black bag he found in the caves to the R department. He heard there was a good expert at the police who could tell the value of old bills in a bag if they had serial numbers. The cops were shocked because the bag had over 200,000 in super rare bills, each worth at least 5 times their face value. The guy was already dreaming about all the money, like the system wanted him to get rich. The expert checked the bag and saw something that made his palms sweat. He asked where the hero found that item. Kou snapped out of his daydream. He didn't get why the cop reacted so weird to his find. This bag was already part of a case codenamed M. The cops told the kid the parents of the kidnapped kids pooled their money and gave it to the criminals. The guy couldn't believe it. Could the detective somehow be connected to the kidnappers? Kou smiled at everyone like he was up to something, but no one could tell if he was really the thief. Lee Winey said that 25 years ago, several rich families in Village M lived there because their kids had the best education opportunities, so they sent them to a temporary school in the city. He hired a driver named Nu Waiguan to take the kids to school, and they both loved blasting music on the way. That day, the radio broke, so the guy decided to have his kids sing a childhood song to keep things light on the road. As the red car zoomed into the tunnel, the kids' cheerful voices filled the air. The kids kept singing and the car kept driving deeper into the dark. At midnight, the mine where they found the bag was swarming with cops, cars, and helicopters, all on high alert. Officers were told to check everything for any possible evidence. 3 days after the car vanished, the thieves called the family demanding $1,200,000 ransom, and the assistant finished her report. The kids didn't get any help, because once the parents paid up, the kidnappers cut off all contact and cops still haven't found a single clue in 26 years. The money bag had an orange sticker exactly like the one on the bag the guy picked up. Zhang Jinfen couldn't wrap his head around how the guy caught the criminal and got another case going. Maybe the guy had some kind of superpowers. The system's antics made the guy question things right away, because how could there be so much money in such a rundown place? 2 officers were chatting, confused about what they were even doing out here at night, thinking they were just wasting time. All the treasure hunters froze, listening for every sound while the cops found something big. Reporters swarmed the cops with questions, wanting to know if they really found the bodies of the kidnapped kids from 26 years ago, and if all the victims were accounted for, plus if the mayor had arrived at the station. The police spokesperson couldn't comment yet, and promised to let the reporters know as soon as there were updates. The guy was in a real bad mood. No one could have guessed that such a find was waiting for them in the mine tunnels. For 26 years, the bodies of the kidnapped kids had been lying in that mine. So that could only mean one thing. The investigation into the missing children case in District M was officially reopened. Kou walked into the conference room just as the police official was starting their report. There were a ton of people in the room, and the guy's lucky his assistant took his seat. 5 bodies were found in the abandoned mine. DNA tests identified 4 of the kids. Lion Melee 9, Lion Zhuhan 12, Tao Zhao 11, and Lu Hunxian 10. The last body belonged to the driver named Nai Waiguang, who was taking the kids to school that day and disappeared with them. At midnight, the precinct was buzzing with activity, with only a lone boy's figure visible in the hallways. The guy stared out the window at the full moon and remembered the meeting with the parents of the kidnapped, 11-year-old Tao Kao from a few hours earlier. A police officer introduced Kao Yo to the parents of one of the deceased children, since it was he who found the crime scene and the bag of money for the ransom. The father of the deceased boy firmly shook the detective's hand, deeply grateful to the officer for some even unhelpful news about his son. The woman was crying so hard and shaking that the man finally spoke up, because after all these years they'd both been worn down by uncertainty, but the guy gave them a chance to say goodbye as his son. The man couldn't hold back his tears anymore, emotions totally took over, but the detective promised to find the killer no matter what. The only victim of the kidnappers who was still missing was little Sissy. If the girl didn't die that night, she'd be around 33 now, and maybe they could find her by following the sketch the experts made. The guy got so deep into his thoughts, he didn't notice anyone else was still working late at the precinct. The guy got curious about which of his coworkers were so dedicated to the case they stayed late, not heading home yet. In the office, the detective spotted Ku Pin, who was always super serious about the investigation, which made sense why she stayed late since the girl never gave up hope. The girl glanced over her shoulder and saw Zhao Yu, not getting why the guy was still at the precinct. The detective smiled, finding his colleague's antics kind of fun, and replied he came to learn from the senior officer. The department head admitted the guy wasn't her favorite, but his skills were super valuable, especially with their tough case lately. The cop was totally open to working with the hero, and wanted to hear if he had any ideas about their case. The guy was checking out the hot chick and thinking through all his options. This night could get way more interesting than he expected. The officer's mood totally turned around. He grabbed the pen from his colleague and decided not to take the barbs personally, just taking everything she said as compliments. Tonight wasn't about fun stuff, because the cops had way too much work to do. The guy shared his thoughts, saying the cops hadn't found a single clue in years because the kidnappers had already set up the perfect plan. The guy had a totally different plan. He didn't buy into the previous detectives' take on the case at all. Zhao Yuo's theory said their kidnapping could have really just been a random thing. Ku Pin was super confused. She didn't get how the detective's theory even made sense or how it could be possible. It sounded way too crazy. The hero started explaining that usually after a carjacking, the criminals call the victims' families right away and demand a ransom. The early call was meant to stop the parents' FROM Chinese letter, but this time they waited 3 days before calling, and that was super weird. This time the car vanished along with the kids, which was weird because usually criminals take victims in their own cars. Minivans are way more obvious, and if the police had stopped them, there would have been a lot of questions. Based on the info gathered over the years, the killer was at least 3 people. 5 kids were already on the way to school with an adult driver, and adding 3 more would make it hard to fit in such a small car. The guy shared his really unusual take on that terrible day, a fresh idea that none of the detectives working the case had ever considered. The department head took notice of the colleagues' opinions. He spoke with confidence and conviction. There were facts that didn't fit the theory, because if the kidnappers weren't pros, how'd they even think to call in a ransom and kill the hostages, then just vanish without a trace? Everything was done so perfectly it was almost impossible. The guy smiled, obviously knowing the girl had never kidnapped anyone, so she couldn't possibly know anything since such a job takes serious skill. The guy knew a lot of criminals and none of them could pull off such a perfect crime. He figured they didn't have a plan at first because they just wanted to steal the car or money and didn't expect so many people in the vehicle. Ku Pin couldn't believe what she'd heard, because what did the guy's words about her not kidnapping anyone mean? Did he imply he'd had similar experience before? The guy cleared his throat and wanted to change the subject fast. Like, how could the girl even think that, since when investigating such cases they should look at all the criminals' eyes? The girl agreed. Of course the guy fit the bill for someone who'd use those methods. The detective also ruled out the idea that the driver NYY gun was in on the killers, since he was from the same town as the kids and enjoyed his job, so there was no reason for him to get involved. Zhao Yu was sure that if the kidnappers were still alive, they'd be incredibly rich. Poor folks wouldn't just leave a bag with 200,000 cash in the middle of the mine, where no one else knew about it. They'd just take it with them right away. The cops had a lead. They needed to check everyone who suddenly got rich around that time, but if they didn't narrow down the suspects, it'd be really tough. The detectives figured if they started the search now, they'd definitely find the criminals if they're still alive, and they wouldn't be able to hide from justice anymore. The meeting ended with a 97% success rate. The invisible X-10 detector that worked within a 10-meter radius and could spot listening devices, cameras, and other surveillance gear, then pin their locations within 10 minutes. Van Fei heard the guy's voice asking if she was waiting for him to relax and have a nice glass of wine together. The forensic expert looked at the guy, waiting for the detective to crack the case and find the guilty party. The doctor also told the cop that the autopsy results for the victims were already in. The hero found out from the report that the mine collapsed because of an explosion, and all 5 victims had marks from the shockwave on their bodies. But it wasn't clear if they died from the blast, or if the explosion happened after they were already dead. Bodies were found with ropes still tied around them, suggesting they'd been bound up, and the knots were still intact even during the collapse. The driver had bruises and knife wounds, one of which pierced his heart, which might have been the cause of his death. The police station was buzzing with activity. Officers chatted among themselves, and a lot of them didn't think a kid could solve another case, let alone one that would require some extra effort. Detectives were talking about how Zhao Yu found the bag, and the victim's family gave him 100 or even 200,000 yen, making him super rich. He wasn't in the mood for chit-chat with the guys. His mind was completely on the autopsy results, and the only thing he cared about was the unsolved case. Captain Mao walked into the department, and everyone rushed to greet him because the boss had just been released from the hospital, and a lot had happened in his absence. The guys were really annoying the colleagues, who were always thinking about money and food, and compared to Ku Pin, who squeezed every last drop out of herself, they were basically trash. Kou lost his temper, saying if the guys had more interesting things to do than the investigation, they'd better handle them somewhere else. There were still detectives in the department, and the empty chatter was really getting in the way of their work. The city council director didn't get why the guy was doing things to make all his team partners hate him. The medical examiner greeted the director, but it was unclear why he was there since it wasn't part of the council president's job. The man put his hand on the guy's shoulder, distracting him, but the director needed his nephew's attention urgently. What the police heard was like a thunderclap, since no one expected Zhao Yu to have such a high-ranking relative, and this topic would be discussed in every office for another week. The man asked the guy to follow him since he had a very important matter to discuss with him that needed to be addressed immediately. The hero stared at the stranger and couldn't figure out what he wanted or who he even was. The detective couldn't wrap his head around what kind of case the director had against him. The guy definitely had something up his sleeve, but it wasn't clear what. The city council leader closed his eyes and took a sip of refreshing water. He'd done everything he could. The departing guy asked the guy to try not to show off his personality in the future and to really try hard, which really surprised the guy. Everyone was super curious about what the director was talking to Zhao Yu about, so the guys started hanging around what they thought was an influential person. The guy had no idea why the man asked him to step aside, and the conversation was just a boring, ordinary chat that didn't mean much. The other cops were totally frustrated by that answer, but the detective had the boss's favor and could keep everything secret. The guy was standing on the edge of a cliff looking down into a super deep chasm where there was almost no chance of surviving a fall. He thought this was the spot where the kidnappers demanded a ransom, even though Li Wei-nai's voice was calling him. The girl screamed into the chief's ear to get his attention, almost deafening the guy in the process. The detective got really mad at the assistant's move, but she called him a few times to see if the hero had any new ideas. KOU told the lady that when the parents approached the cliff, they saw the radios the kidnappers had set up for them. At least one of the criminals had to be nearby watching the victim's actions. The victims were forced to stand on the red line the killers drew and toss their bags of money into the same spot, so there had to be another kidnapper there. But the kids couldn't be left unattended either, so there had to be a third accomplice. According to Ku Pin's report, they managed to take the money under police supervision, had their own informants in the bag and knew everything that happened, so they were either former officers or had someone inside the department. The explosives in the mine looked like the kind usually used for blasting, so there was probably an explosives expert among the criminals. The guy picked up his phone and answered the call because someone really wanted to talk to him and kept calling non-stop. The info the kid heard really threw him for a loop and messed with his nerves because he was supposed to act like a thug. The guy was pinned down hard to the floor, his face twisted in a pain-filled grimace. The guy looked down at the scum, not even letting them cross his path, and realized how bad things could get for them. The guy raised his new friend's head to make him look at him and remember that from now on he'd call him Brother Tianlu, while their older boss Lion sat at a table near. During the interrogation, the detective found out the man in glasses gave the gang 20,000 each to kick out all the customers and throw a riot in the restaurant. The detective told the gang to leave the money and clear out of the place, and to think twice about who they work for because it could cost them more than just a few teeth. The detective's face got dark when one of the gang members said he didn't have cash on him, but he quickly got the hint and found the exact amount to pay right then. Su Yan laughed out loud without holding back. His subordinate played the criminal so brilliantly even he believed it, and the gang forever made him their top boss Lian. The guy immediately realized the petty thieves were brand new to the criminal world and had no experience at all. The boss snapped back to seriousness, telling the guy that whatever decision he made on the case they'd recently discussed would be taken as his agreement. The man invited the guy to become a special investigator in the disciplinary inspection department, promising he'd organize a crackdown and pull in as many people involved in criminal activities as possible whenever he faced similar situations. Today, the red-lipped guy revealed his real identity. He came to the city to conduct an investigation, the supervisor of oversight. It was just a cover job. Didn't expect that guy to be such a pro-criminal that he even made the gang spill the name of one of their top bosses. The detective looked so much like a gangster it seemed like he actually was one, which really confused Su Yan. The new crew had a blast celebrating the successful job and the teamwork that promised to be super productive. Zhao Yue had a bad thought pop in his head, remembering his old acquaintance who was also a pro. The guy bolted out the door with an urgent mission, needed to check his theory ASAP. The boss sighed with understanding, knowing he was taking on someone who could never sit still for long. QN prison was a special place where the most dangerous criminals were held, ones you couldn't risk letting out into society. A tall old man in cuffs walked into the room, having spent over a year here for his crime. The criminal sat across from the detective, who was watching every move carefully. The guy knew exactly who was sitting across from him, and for the kidnapping case, this man was the best in the business. Jiao Hai was guilty of the kidnapping and murder, and his two accomplices were shot dead. But he served his life sentence because his victim died of a heart attack, and he was basically a pro at what he did. The detective didn't waste time on pleasantries, jumping straight into the case, and he was curious about the situation where the criminal could have killed his hostage. The man serving a life sentence was really surprised by the cop's question, and he was totally unprepared for such an intense interrogation. Jiao Hai was really annoyed by the officer's words since the cop had read his file and the woman just had a heart attack. He didn't kill her. The kidnapping was just for ransom. No one wants to kill hostages. The guy was shocked by the prisoner's wild reaction, and he could see tears in his eyes, but it was totally unexpected. And for the guy, it was crucial that a random killer calmed down and settled down. Zhao Yu explained he came from a totally different case he was investigating and only needed info from the convicted guy, and the kid didn't care about the case at all. The hero even promised if the guy turned out useful, he'd help the prisoner get out of jail and one day see freedom without bars. The criminal, like many others back then, had plenty of reasons to kill the hostages, like the victim might have seen the kidnapper's face, and he was scared to expose himself. Maybe the victim's family didn't cooperate and called the cops, or the hostages got sick, or maybe they tried to escape and everything went wrong, but the guy thought Case M wasn't like that. The man figured this case involved real psychopaths because they kidnapped poor kids, took all their money, and just killed them without showing any humanity. Taking the driver hostage didn't make sense because they could only kidnap the kids and either send NY Vagyun to their families with a ransom demand, or give him a bloody knife to scare the parents into handing over all the money. The criminal said he'd be an idiot to take such a strong guy hostage, which was super risky and made the detective wonder if the driver might have been involved too. The guy kept talking non-stop, while the teenager thought there was another prisoner in the cell who could help answer a bunch of questions. They brought another criminal into the interrogation room to try and win the prisoner's favor, and the detective lit a match to help him light a cigarette. Yan Wentao, still known as the killer who drowned his victim in Reservoir Q and was caught by Officer Zhao in the mine where they found the ransom bag and the bodies of the victims, didn't know how he could help the teenager. The guy lights a cigarette. This conversation could get real long since he wants to know how the killer found that shaft where he was hiding. The first few years of mining at the city's shaft were under contract with private parties, so if you had the cash, you could invest in researching some shafts and try your luck. The chance to get rich was huge if they found silver or other expensive metals and treasures, but if it turned out to be empty, the investor could end up losing everything. The drawings showed these shafts as empty, since they said there was nothing and the criminal didn't know about that cave before. He was just trying to escape from the chasing officer. The killer was thinking about who put up that fence where he was hiding, and figured that person had been there a long time, while the guy was also curious if the prisoner knew the contract was specifically for that shaft. Chen Sanli's rich family had to buy the land, but he was already dead when they found him, leaving his family broke and homeless. Zhao Yu was looking over the criminal's info, which wasn't much but enough to keep the case moving. Arku Pin asked the young detective again if she'd heard Chen Sanli's name right. The detective thought the dead guy might be one of the kidnappers, since he signed a contract for that mine but got killed in a fight with his partner, leaving his family on the street. The cop agreed the theory made sense and promised to send people to get info on that millionaire. The guy surprised his senior colleague again, and she didn't expect anyone to ask the criminals themselves for tips to find new clues. The guy was really proud of himself and thought the girl should have expected his kind of move, since they'd been hanging out for days. The woman stopped the detective by slamming her hand over his mouth, and the move caught the guy completely off guard. The head of Group B couldn't take the guy's self-praise anymore, and as soon as he started bragging about Zhao Yu, she immediately recognized him. The hero found the girl's behavior hilarious and figured she'd have to split her bonus with him once the case was closed, but she was dead set against that idea. Ku Pin offered to join the detective for a tasty dinner and some interesting conversation as a thank you for his help. The guy agreed to the date, but with one condition: he'd pay for the meal himself. The happy reunion ended with a 76% rating, and the hero got a new invisible night vision device. He worked all night and fell asleep at the R station desk, but a persistent phone drill woke him up at 7 in the morning. Still half asleep and not even lifting his head from his makeshift bed, the detective decided to answer the call anyway. The guy's eyes snapped open instantly, sleep vanished, and pure all-consuming fear took over his body. The news knocked the detective off his feet, his phone slipped from his hands, shattered on the concrete, and his heart felt like it was breaking too. Dark clouds rolled in, and it looked like nature itself was crying, feeling the pain of the people. KOU arrived at the scene, where a bunch of police patrols were already waiting, but the guy was too exhausted from running to care right now. The hero's face was twisted in rage. He looked more like a trapped animal than a person, and he didn't get why everyone just froze and did nothing. They had to rush to help the injured, call an ambulance, get her to the hospital, do something, but the doctors' grim faces said it all. Zhang Jinfeng was drenched in cold sweat, and he was the only one who could say anything to the guy to calm him down and get him to take control. Li Wenyi couldn't hold back her tears. It was one of the worst days of her life, and for the whole police department too. The mask of hatred slid off the guy's face, replaced by pure agony from his feet to his head, and he couldn't stop shaking and crying anymore. It couldn't be Ku Pin, she couldn't die, but there she lay in the dark city surrounded by police, eyes wide open, no longer the captain of Squad V. Van Fei knelt by the girl's body, checking for any signs of life, hoping against hope that the doctor still had a chance, not wanting to lose someone close. KOU ran among the police, trying to convince everyone the pretty girl was just unconscious and needed immediate help. The medics saw the guy having a meltdown, couldn't hold back anymore, grabbed him by the shirt with one hand and slapped him hard with the other. The hero had to step in right now because everyone needed a detective, not a scared kid, and Ku Pin needed him most right then. Kou's tears poured down his face when he finally realized the girl was dead. She'd never walk into the police station again. Sister Sin told the chief they needed to take the body to the lab for analysis because they had to figure out why their colleague died. The department head ordered Luni Xiao Zhang to grab some guys and lift up the victim, but no one moved an inch when the hero approached the dead body. The guy picked up the lifeless body with his hands. He couldn't let anyone defile the girl with their dirty touches. No cop was worth even a strand of her hair. The guy carried the most loyal officer to the station by himself. Now her body felt way too light, almost weightless, which reminded him again that the pretty guy's heart wasn't beating anymore. At the R police station, the missing persons expert was reporting on the case of Ku Pin. Yesterday at midnight, when the cop was heading home, a bad incident happened on the road. The car left clear skid marks but no crash, so the girl hit the brakes instantly when a pedestrian appeared, stepped out to check everything was okay, and got stabbed right then. No cameras were on the police car, and the street where it all happened was under repair, so there was no way to confirm the theory. The detective didn't buy the police's conclusion that it was a simple robbery gone wrong, since a thief planning a basic theft would have bolted the second they saw the uniformed cop. The body had so many stab wounds it didn't look like a murder, more like a crime meant to look like a robbery. The guy's eyes widened when he realized the girl's death wasn't random, so someone definitely had a motive to kill her. The guy from Ku Pin remembered the conversation from the day before when he talked about Chen Sanli, the guy the pretty girl needed to find info on, so it all clicked that the guy was the one they were looking for. He couldn't believe it. Was this really connected to their suspect? Did the info he gave actually lead to his colleague's death? Van Fei walked into the conference room, looking closely at the folder in her hands, and something in the documents didn't add up. There was a strange inconsistency. The forensic expert said the autopsy results came in, and even though the cop had lots of stab wounds, the fatal one was the one aimed at her back, hitting straight into her heart and breaking all the bones in its path. The doctor's words confirmed the guy's worst fears. It looked like the killer was definitely a pro. The cops got scared when news broke that a knife with fingerprints matching Hu Meng was found in a blood-stained container about a kilometer from town. The police network reported that the suspect had the victim's bag and was a known criminal among officers, having previously gone to jail for robbery and illegal gun possession. While other detectives decided to take revenge for their colleague, Zhao Yu reviewed the video evidence the police had found. The footage, shot nearby the crime scene, showed the suspect without a knife in hand, even though the weapon was found a kilometer away from the murder location. Plus, the recording showed the suspect wasn't fully in control, which probably wouldn't let him beat an experienced officer like Ku Pin. The detective's veins bulged on his cheeks, his face twisted with rage, his eyes bloodshot, and his teeth seemed to twist into something inhuman. So intense was his anger that if the guy on the video was involved, he wasn't working alone. While everyone argued over how they still couldn't find Hu Man despite checking every known location, the detective stood silently by the girl's old desk. By midnight, the whole team that had lost their captain regrouped at the precinct. The guy studied the photo of the beauty while half listening to the chatter about how all the patrols were now watching the bar where the suspect and his friend Li Chunchua were hanging out. But if the criminal didn't show up in 24 hours, tracking him down would be a nightmare. Still staring at the photo, the detective spoke up, reminding his colleagues that yesterday they had been searching for info on a guy named Chen Sanli. Last night, Senior Officer Ku Pin sent her subordinates home and told them to rest up because they had a tough day of searching for the suspect in the missing children case ahead. The red-haired guy told the guy they found no info on the person he was looking for because everyone had already gone home. The junior officer wanted to walk his boss home since he thought she didn't feel great, but the captain brushed off his concerns and said she was fine and they'd meet tomorrow. The red-haired guy couldn't hold back his tears anymore, and if he had insisted and driven the captain, none of this would have happened. Chow Yua couldn't stop thinking about the photo of the dead cop and felt partly responsible for it too. The hero remembered the girl's rare compliments and the quiet evenings they spent together investigating in an empty lot. The guy thought back to the officer's bright smile and the promise of a tasty dinner they never got to have. The detective clenched the thin bracelet from the victim with 2 cubes in his fist, determined not to let her die in vain and find both the killer from Case M and the guy who dared attack the best cop. All the chatter in the office stopped dead. Everyone's eyes locked on Zhao Yao, who had a way to make Hu Man come out of hiding. The city of Q was getting dark with streetlights barely lighting up the alleys and streets, but one local bar's window glowed just as bright as a Christmas tree. The guy turned his head to the cops, needing the bravest one among them, the one who wouldn't flinch to risk their own life for justice, the one ready to jump in right now. When the detective arrived, his old friend opened the door from the inside. Once a lowlife from the restaurant, now he worked for him. The guy was waiting for news, taking another drag on his cigarette, but civilized methods were behind them, and the criminals had made a huge mistake by crossing the line for good. The officer was told his subordinates found Hu Man's girl, and in the morning he called her saying he'd gotten himself into serious trouble, needed to lay low, and asked for help from someone named Lee Chunchua. He coughed out a harsh cloud of smoke that burned not just his lungs but his soul, then asked the gang if the girl got her punishment. The scum knew their stuff, and even though the bar owner put up a long fight, they found a way to shut her up, though they had to leave a few of her bones intact to keep her from moving. The officer in charge of watching over Hu Man's girl had to be tied up during the operation because he didn't want to give the criminals full freedom, thinking it was against the rules. The detective flicked his cigarette butt and left the scene. He was definitely going to fire his colleague soon, but right now he had much more important things to deal with. The collectors stayed standing with the tied-up cop by the car. Their boss could rely on them for any job. They'd never let him down under any circumstances. KOU walked with two other colleagues through the dark city streets. The game's time limit ran out when the criminals decided to kill one of them. The girl found the police officers, who clearly got in touch with each other after that incident. The guys also heard that Lee Chunchua had big connections in the government, and his tea club had a lot of henchmen. The second suspect was already being questioned, but he said he didn't know the husband, and the young cops didn't know what to do if he didn't confess again. Zhao Yu kept staring out the window, seeming like he wasn't paying attention to the conversation in the car. But everyone realized he was listening when the kid asked if anyone had brought along a firearm. In a huge, fancy mansion in the city outskirts, things were pretty quiet until the police stormed in. The guys with the badges and guns told everyone to stay calm, do exactly what they said, and not mess with the investigation, especially not to resist. Sitting in the center of the room with his legs on the table, the head of the house had lived in the neighborhood for years and never had a problem with the cops. The estate owner didn't even blink at the arrival of the young guys, since even their leader was too scared to cross the man's path, knowing the consequences could be serious. Lee Chunchua didn't think the bunch of cops, whose milk hadn't even dried on their lips, could be a real threat to him. The house owner was laughing at the new arrivals, thinking his connections and contacts made him untouchable. Zhao Yu's single powerful swing knocked the arrogant guy's pride right off, and the man didn't expect a guy like him to dare do that. The guy with connections flew across the room, flipping the table he'd been lounging on with his body. The guy with the short beard couldn't believe this unworthy guy not only touched him without permission, but also punched him right in the face. The detective kicked the homeowner down to the floor, and he really got scared, realizing his situation was looking pretty bad right now. The guy's eyes lit up with devilish fire. He needed to know where Hu Meng was right now, and was willing to get that info any way possible, no matter the consequences. The estate owner kept insisting the cops didn't sign up for this and couldn't just walk away, but his guards finally realized some crazy guy had dared to hit their boss. The hero gave his teammates a subtle signal they might miss if they weren't watching the young guy closely. The red-haired cop got the silent signal from his partner and knew the real show was about to start. The guy no one had noticed for a while suddenly got a gun and shot at the ceiling to draw attention. Everyone in the room got a ringing in their ears and a sharp pain that bruised their bodies. The guy's face was losing its human features. Now he looked more like a beast that brings death and destruction, just like always when it came to killing Ku Pin. The young guy with the crazy look warned that if anyone took a single step, they'd get shot as an accomplice to the murder. Whispers spread through the hall. No one knew Lee Huanhua had killed a person, so they'd never help him for any reason. The detective kept pushing his buddy, thinking he was smart and should realize that the young officers wouldn't dare mess with such a respected guy without an order. The estate owner realized in time he needed to start telling the truth, or the kid might use force. Zhao Yu kept his raised leg over the man's lower limb, even after carefully listening to his opponent. The guy who had his arrogance knocked out in front of all his guests smiled, and said he didn't know where his friend had gone, but was happy to help the police find him. The hero's vein pulsed under his eye, his retinal blood vessels swelled, and the guy really hated when people lied to him, feeling it from several kilometers away, and he wouldn't forgive this worm so easily. The officer slammed his recently raised leg down, the loud crunch under his boot sole echoing clearly. Lee Huanhua fell on his back and grabbed his injured leg. Pain twisted his body and made it hard to think straight. The man opened his eyes and looked up at his executioner, scared and realizing it was time to pay for all his sins. The house owner begged the boy to stop and not continue. He was ready to confess everything and give the guy his last bit, just to avoid the boy asking him to do something that would end the suffering. Hu Meng was hiding on a huge warehouse and didn't know his best friend had traded his freedom and life for his own interests. The night was quiet and unremarkable. Stars silently watched through sparse clouds as events unfolded on the ground. A small police unit was moving quickly between the buildings of Warehouse N. They had already called the captain and asked for reinforcements to be sent to their location as soon as possible. The red-haired guy told the boss they'd gotten a tip from an anonymous source about where Hu Man was hiding. After hanging up, the guy turned to the hero and said they needed to search the crew, but it was way too big and they didn't know where the criminal was, so they had to decide if they should split up. They couldn't wait any longer. Maybe their people were watching Chun Hua, but they weren't sure how she was contacting the guy. And if he found out the police were coming for him, he'd just run again. While the detectives checked the map for any weird movement patterns, a tired, light-haired man stepped out from the warehouse buildings. The officers turned to the guy and couldn't believe their eyes because standing in front of them was the long-sought-after criminal they'd been looking for so long. Hu Man took a few long seconds to process the situation and realized those guys were after him for sure. The likely killer took off running as fast as he could the second he realized the detective was about to catch up. The mean guy demanded the criminal stop and surrender so they could at least act a little bit more kindly. Hu Man focused on the detective's threat and tried to get to cover behind one of the warehouse buildings as fast as he could. The cop chased the runner into the hangar. The chase had worn him out a bit, but now they were safe since the killer had nowhere left to run. He was trapped almost in their hands. Zhao Yu realized the guy wasn't just running for no reason. Why would a criminal head straight to where he's sure to get caught when he could keep dodging between the warehouse buildings forever? A blinding flash of light blinds the guy and his crew for a few seconds, giving the killer just enough time to pull off his whole plan. When the guy's eyes adjusted to the bright light, he saw a huge room with beds lined up along the walls, and each one occupied by a man who wasn't too happy to see the cops. The villain's smiles turned into snarls, and he realized now taking down Hu Meng was gonna be a whole lot harder. The criminal told the other escapees that the men chasing him were cops, and they needed to stop them before help arrived and the stash got taken. A huge crowd of guys charged at the detectives, grabbing whatever they could find to use as weapons, sticks, bats, even metal pipes. Two guys led by Zhao Yu stood there waiting for what was next, not scared at all, just ready for the fight that was bound to happen. The first attacker who got up close with the detective went down fast. The guy was super strong and tough, a pro at hand-to-hand combat, so he wasn't worried about the fight. The hero kept hitting in all directions while telling his teammates to move fast and grab Hu Man before it was too late. The cops tried to run for the exit, but the attackers weren't letting them escape so easy. There were way more of them and they caught up to the guys real quick. The detective realized his back was completely exposed when a robber attacked from behind, wrapping his arms around the boy's neck and body with a grip so tight it felt like a death hold. The sparring experience of the young guy helped him escape the situation, using his body to pin the attacker against the metal two-tiered bed behind him with all his strength. Meanwhile, another robber approached the guy from the side, swung a wooden stick at his head with full force, and the bat shattered into several pieces on impact. Koyu's face turned a bright red on one side, like someone had splashed him with a vivid crimson paint. The boy's demonic mask blocked his vision again. He turned to face his attacker with a glare that promised nothing but doom, locking eyes like he was about to end the criminal's life right then. The crook stepped back at the sight of the detective, who was unbreakable, like steel instead of muscle and bone. The cops' partners noticed a new wound on the guy's face, and it really worried them, but they tried to wake him up, and he was already set on his victims. The guy gripped a piece of wood in his hand, turned to the thief, and slammed the wood down on him. The death of Ku Pin revealed the boy's deepest soul particles and unleashed all the demons, which had no intention of returning, while the attackers only fed their bloodlust more. Seeing his friend's death, one of the runaways grabbed a short metal sword and charged at the detective to settle the score. The second half of the wooden stick pierced the chest of the clumsy killer with a steel sword, and he screamed in agony from the pain. The boy showed no emotion as he scattered the fugitives across the room, with warm crimson rivers flowing around him. The criminal's scream shattered the brief silence in the hangar, and he clutched a wooden pole in terror, not knowing what to do next, while a panicked colleague ran to him. The detective grabbed the steel weapon with bloodied hands, which had been used against him by one of the fugitives, further scaring those who had just approached him and the other two officers in a large crowd. People parted around the boy, forming a semicircle of panicked onlookers who didn't know how to handle one man. The injured guy's shadow loomed over him like a warning of coming punishment for all his sins, and the criminal's mind flashed with memories of his short, doomed life. One of the criminals was brave enough to grab a piece of metal, but even he shook with fear thinking about what he was about to do. Seeing the brave guy's example, some of the room's owners grabbed their lost weapons back, all while the kid didn't notice them. The kid walked through the living hallway of people with a blank face, ignoring everyone except his target. After clearing all the obstacles, the police still went after Hu Man's trail since there were no cars nearby, and he couldn't get too far. Zhao Yu suddenly stopped and saw something around the corner that could speed up the search for the killer and make it harder for him to escape unnoticed. The guy climbed onto the iron horse and mashed the clutch pedal. It was his first time, but he loved fast rides and figured out how to handle it quickly. The system again guessed what the guy would need in a tough situation, giving him a universal key. The guy was about to move out when a gunshot sound interrupted, meaning someone was nearby and it was dangerous. A red-haired colleague appeared around a building, looking pretty bad, bent over and super tired, probably from a fast chase. The hero got closer to the cop to check if he was okay, but the cop told him Hu Man was just a few meters away and armed, so he had to be arrested for sure. The detective raced after the trail, sure his partner was leading them right, could trust him, and he'd definitely catch the suspect. The fugitive's strength was fading, he didn't know how much longer he could run, but felt the cops behind him and couldn't stop even for a second to catch his breath. Turning around at the sound of the roaring engine, the criminals saw the leader of the squad riding a motorcycle, already breathing down his neck. When the guy opened his eyes, he was blown away by what he saw, something so crazy it didn't make sense and left him completely stunned. The killer stopped, pulled a gun from his pocket, closed his eyes tight from fear, and fired one shot. A big motorcycle zoomed toward Hu Man, blinding him with its bright headlights, but the rider was nowhere to be seen. The motorcycle stopped right in front of the flustered criminal, who couldn't figure out how the detective just vanished into thin air. Some invisible force made the guy lose his balance, sending him flying backward onto the asphalt, where he hit his tailbone hard. The criminal didn't pay attention to the pain in his back from landing, curling up into a ball, but his stomach hurt way more for reasons he didn't get. A huge fuel barrel hangs over the runaway's head like it's being held by a ghost, and this alley clearly has some dark magic at work. A metal object bounces off the suspect's face and rolls down the street like it's done its job and no longer needed. The guy grabs his nose, his face hurts, but what really bugs him is figuring out how to fight something you can't see and which sense to use in a battle like that. The system says the invisible costume's time is up, and the killer starts getting a cop with a wild look in his eyes and a gun in his hand. The happy reunion ends with a 96% success, getting an invisible breathing apparatus that can supply oxygen for 10 minutes. The guy ran into Miss Wan at the clinic. Even though he'd asked her to be a little softer today, she was way too harsh anyway. The beauty studied the officer closely, holding his chin to keep his face steady. Today's rough treatment was totally justified. The hero gripped the doctor's robe so hard his veins bulged, proving he was still human, not the cold machine everyone thought he was. The girl knew the detective was in pain, the whole process sucked, but there was no other way to stitch up his wound. The doctor finished the stitch. It came out even and neat, showing she was used to this, but the guy still needed a full hospital checkup. Van Fei was worried the guy might have a concussion or worse, which could lead to bigger health problems down the line. The guy brushed off his worried colleague, feeling way better now with the wound looking like just a minor scratch, and in another life he'd dealt with way worse injuries. The guy caught sight of something weird out of the corner of his eye, sparking more questions in his wild imagination. The captain shot Zhao Yu a fiery glare, not getting why she was so focused on him since nothing supernatural had happened. The lady was supposed to keep an eye on the guy, or else he'd snap again and mess things up not just for himself but the whole precinct. The door swung open with a loud thud, and a guy flew into the room, shocking everyone present who hadn't expected any guests. Standing in front of the detective was his red-haired colleague and two officers, all in their dress uniform and saluting him. The police were members of Group B, and on behalf of their deceased Captain Ku Pin, thanked the kid with tears in their eyes for helping them catch the killer. The guy used to not be too popular with the team, but everything changed now and they promised to help anytime he called. But the kid said it was all good since the dead girl was his friend and there was no need for thanks. This wasn't all the news for Zhao Yao. His boss called him to his office and wanted to see him as soon as possible. The guy didn't get why the boss wanted to take him off the case while they were already in the chief's office. He thought the detective was abusing his power by hiring people to interrogate the suspect's girl, messing up the officer's investigation, and even breaking someone's leg. 12 people were hospitalized with serious injuries, 3 are still in the hospital and 1 is in critical condition. This guy caused a ton of problems, but the officers didn't act like that. He didn't agree because there were 40 attackers and they were just 3, so yesterday night they just jumped on them, forcing the cops to defend themselves, no time to play nice. The chief didn't like the guy's ego. No one could argue with him. After all, they were police officers and had full responsibility for their actions. The guy refused to back down, trying to convince the man that before Ku Pin's death they'd worked together on the M case, and there's a good chance these two cases are connected. The video from the murder scene showed Hu Meng leaving but didn't capture him arriving there in the first place. The suspect was missing, but his weapon was found a kilometer away in a trash can on the other side of town, meaning he had an accomplice or someone framed him. The guy was losing it, realizing the killer knew every move his victim made, which means he wasn't just passing through and there's definitely a mole in the precinct, so he needed to crack this case fast. No matter how he tried to calm Zhao Yao down, he insisted that when investigating crimes you need solid evidence, so the lawsuit against him was already in the works and the guy should have known. Ku Pin was sitting at the table eating her lunch, but that didn't explain how she ended up there. The genuine girl was surprised by the guy's question but didn't let it show, smiling and asking where else she could be. The guy stayed quiet, his face buried in his hands, not wanting to say the obvious things they both knew. Because the girl couldn't be there, she was dead. The beauty took a sip of her drink, not sure if the guy just wanted to eat lunch with her after finishing whatever he was doing. The detective felt really guilty because if he hadn't forced the police to look into Chen Sanli, maybe nothing would have happened. One of the top captains rolled her eyes and took a heavy breath, realizing this kid's acting like a hero even though he can't be sure these two cases are connected. The detective raised his glass, vowing he'd find whoever did this to the girl no matter how hard or how long it took. He'd dig them up from under the ground. Ku Pin also raised her glass, studying the guy while never doubting him for a second. The detective's tears poured down like a waterfall under his closed eyes. His sleep was both beautiful and painfully intense. Somewhere at the edge of Zhao Yu's consciousness, he knew this was all impossible, but he was still sticking to the promise he made to his fallen colleague. Finally, the funeral ceremony started for the dead girl. After the autopsy and all the investigation, they handed her body over to her family. A big hall filled with family members, friends, and colleagues of Ku Pin. None of them believe they'll ever hear her voice or laugh again or see her face. The dead girl's husband held their little daughter in his arms. The kid was crying because she didn't understand why mom wasn't waking up, and why dad didn't want to wake her up so they could play together again. No matter how he had to get back to the station, he needed to keep investigating the case of M, figure out why the captain was killed or he'd never forgive himself. The hero's thoughts were interrupted by a loud phone vibration. The guy didn't think anyone would bother him at a time like this, but he figured everyone was already saying goodbye to the great cop. A guy pulls out his phone and notices a call from an unknown number that's not in his contacts. The voice on the line tells Zhao Yu to get over there and even tells him to go alone and fast. The guy looks at the man who just called him and doesn't get why this annoying guy needs him again. The detective, wanting to get back to the station, asks the director Liao what he needs and if the guy can help. The main guy gets out of the driver's seat in silence and walks to the back door, and the guy doesn't get why it's so secret, like he's talking to a Bond movie spy. The man still hadn't said a word when he reached out his hand to pull the door handle and yanked it open. Sitting in the backseat of the car was Director R Department's Jin Zhengbin, who is currently recovering from an illness according to information most people had access to. The detective didn't know what to say. He lost his ability to talk from shock, not understanding why a high-ranking official would need to be there. Finally, the older man spoke, breaking the silence, but he didn't tell the guy to pick him up immediately because he had to deliver flowers and honor the memory of Ku Pin. When the guy finally put the main one in the wheelchair, he figured the guy wanted to ask him something.